Good evening and welcome back. Tonight, we're journeying into medieval England in the year 1200, into a landscape without electric light, paved highways, central heating, alarm clocks, or any of the small conveniences that normally separate you from cold, darkness, mud, and inconvenient farm animals. You wake before sunrise, for a few sleepy moments. There's almost nothing to see. The room around you is black except for the faint reddish glow of embers buried beneath ash in the hearth. Somewhere nearby, another person is breathing deeply. Someone shifts beneath a woolen covering. Outside, an animal makes a low, impatient sound. And then you remember where you are. You're not visiting a castle. You're not a knight preparing for a tournament. And unfortunately, no cheerful bard is waiting beside your bed to provide atmospheric background music. You are an ordinary person in England around the year 1200. If you enjoy these quiet journeys into the everyday lives of people who came before us, you can subscribe and join us again for another evening in the past, and before you become too comfortable in your medieval bed, you can also tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from, and what time it is there. It is always strangely comforting to imagine people listening together from different places while we wander through the same distant night. For now, though, your world is very small. You lie on bedding that depends greatly upon your wealth. In a modest household, this may mean a sack filled with straw, perhaps laid upon a simple wooden frame or directly on a raised surface. Blankets are precious. Wool matters enormously. Linen exists, but good linen requires labour, skill, and money. And privacy. That is a charming modern fantasy. Other members of the household may sleep nearby. Children, relatives, servants, or workers can share the same interior space. In poorer homes, the boundaries between sleeping, eating, working, storing possessions, and simply existing are remarkably thin. The first thing you notice as you wake is probably the cold. Even outside winter, an English morning can feel damp. Your house does not preserve heat particularly well. Walls might be made using timber frames filled with woven branches and clay-based material, although construction varies considerably by region and wealth. Roofs are often thatched. Openings are small because large windows would happily invite the weather indoors. Glass is not something an ordinary rural household casually installs everywhere. The hearth has help during the night, but keeping a large fire burning continuously consumes fuel instead. Embers can be preserved beneath ash, ready to be encouraged back into flame in the morning. You smell yesterday's smoke. It clings to clothing, hair, timber, thatch, and bedding. Many houses of this period lack the later chimney arrangements you might expect. Smoke from the central fire can drift upward through the building and escape imperfectly through openings in the roof and walls. Historians and archaeologists continue to debate exactly how smoke behaved in different types of medieval buildings, because houses varied and most ordinary structures have vanished. Still, one conclusion is wonderfully safe. Your medieval home is not going to smell like lavender-scented furniture polish. You sit up. The floor beneath you may be beaten earth, though again circumstances differ. Rushes or other plant material can sometimes cover sections of flooring. The romantic image of medieval people permanently living above layers of ancient rotting rushes is often exaggerated, but floors certainly collect dirt. Mud enters on shoes, ash escapes the hearth. Food falls. Animals are not famous for respecting domestic boundaries. And now the household begins to stir. There is no alarm clock announcing that it is 6:30 in the morning. Time is experienced differently. Church bells can divide the day in communities where they are audible, but ordinary people also watch the sky, judge shadows, recognize familiar routines, and organize labor around available daylight. In summer, this means very long working days. In winter, darkness becomes a powerful limitation. You pull yourself from your bedding and immediately become aware of how valuable clothing is. Garments are not disposable objects purchased casually and forgotten next season. Cloth represents hours upon hours of human work, Sheep must be raised. Wool must be processed. Fibres must be spun. Thread must be woven. Garments must be cut, stitched, repaired, patched, inherited, and repaired again. That old tunic with the suspicious patch near the elbow is not embarrassing. It is sensible economics. Before dressing fully, you may perform some basic washing. Medieval cleanliness is more complicated than the popular claim that everyone simply avoided water for centuries. People wash hands and faces, and bathing certainly exists. Religious houses, wealthy households, towns, and ordinary communities all provide different evidence for washing practices. But your morning does not involve a 20-minute hot shower. Water must be obtained, then carried, then heated if you want it warm. Suddenly splashing cold water on your face seems remarkably efficient. As your eyes adjust, the house becomes visible in fragments, wooden vessels, pots, baskets, tools, perhaps a chest containing valuable possessions. Nothing here is casually manufactured by machines thousands of miles away. Almost everything carries the evidence of someone's hands. Outside, the darkness is turning grey. You open the door. Cold air enters immediately, along with the smell of wet soil, wood smoke, manure, animals, and vegetation. Before you lies a landscape that would seem both familiar and strange. There are fields, but they are arranged according to agricultural systems very different from modern enclosed farmland. Depending upon where you live, strips cultivated by different households may stretch across larger open fields. Meadows, pasture, woodland, streams, commons, and rough ground form an interconnected working landscape. Your village itself may consist of houses arranged near a road, green, stream, or church. England in 1200 is overwhelmingly rural. London exists, of course, and it is already important. Other towns are growing rapidly as trade expands, yet most people experience life through much smaller communities. The village is your social universe. You know who owns which animals. You know whose daughter recently married. You know who owes somebody grain. You probably know who argued yesterday, and they know equally inconvenient things about you. Medieval privacy is having a difficult morning. A church may rise nearby, its presence far more important than simply providing Sunday services. The Christian calendar structures the year. Feast days and fasts shape food and work. Baptism, marriage, burial, confession, saints, processions, bells, and religious obligations accompany people through life. Yet beliefs are not always neat. A person can attend Mass, pray sincerely to a saint, fear divine judgment, carry a protective charm, repeat a local superstition, and worry about strange noises in the darkness without feeling any obvious contradiction. The boundary between religion, custom, medicine, folklore, and practical experience can be wonderfully blurred. Beyond the settlement lies another England: woodland, marsh, heath, royal forest, cultivated land, roads that are often little more than established tracks. The countryside is not untouched wilderness. Generations have shaped it through farming, grazing, timber cutting, milling, drainage, and settlement. Yet compared with your modern world, darkness still arrives with astonishing authority. At night, there is no orange glow from a distant city staining the horizon. There are stars, clouds, firelight, and blackness. For now, however, dawn is winning. A rooster calls, apparently convinced that nobody else noticed. Smoke begins rising from neighbouring roofs. Doors open. People emerge. The working day is starting, and there is already something that needs doing. There is always something that needs doing. Animals require feeding. Water needs carrying. Fire needs tending. Grain may require processing. Food must be prepared. Tools need checking. Fields wait beyond the houses. You stand for another moment in the cool morning air. It is tempting to imagine medieval life entirely through extremes. Castles and battles, famine and plague, kings and executions. Those things belong to the period, but they are not what fills most ordinary mornings. Most mornings are smaller. Someone searches for a missing shoe. Someone complains about the weather. A child refuses to cooperate. Someone worries about a sick animal. Someone wonders whether the grain will last. Someone laughs. Someone is already tired, and somewhere in all of that ordinary human noise is the real England of 1200. The sun edges higher. You turn back toward the smoky doorway, ready to look more carefully at the humble building that protects you from this enormous medieval world. You duck beneath the doorway and return to the dim interior, carrying a little of the morning cold with you. Now that daylight has begun slipping through the openings, the place that seemed almost shapeless in darkness becomes easier to understand. This is your home, and compared with the modern house you know, it asks you to reconsider what a home actually needs. There is no hallway separating one purpose from another, no fitted kitchen, no bathroom hidden politely behind a door, no bedroom waiting upstairs with a carefully selected mattress and 6 decorative pillows that nobody's actually allowed to sleep on. For many ordinary households, domestic life is concentrated into remarkably little space. The precise appearance of a house varies across England. Local materials matter, wealth matters, regional building traditions matter, even within the same village. 2 households may live rather differently. This is important because there is no single universal medieval cottage that can represent every person living in the year 1200. Still, certain patterns are familiar. Timber is enormously important. A framework of wooden posts and beams can provide the skeleton of the building. Between them, panels may be formed from woven slender branches or rods, commonly associated with what we now call wattle, then covered with a mixture containing clay and other available materials. It sounds primitive until you remember that people have spent generations learning how to build with what surrounds them. A well-maintained wall can perform its job perfectly well. The real enemy is neglect. Rain finds weaknesses, wind finds gaps, timber rots. Thatch needs attention. A medieval house is not something you finish and then politely ignore for 30 years. It is closer to an ongoing negotiation with weather. Above your head, the roof is perhaps the most important part of that negotiation. Thatch can be made from straw, reeds, or other suitable materials depending upon region and availability. Properly constructed, it sheds rain surprisingly effectively. It also provides insulation. But it requires skill. Look upward and you may see the underside of the roof structure, darkened by years of smoke. In some houses, there is no ceiling separating you from the rafters. Smoke from the hearth rises into this upper space. That smoke is irritating, certainly. Your eyes may water. Your lungs would probably submit a complaint if they understood paperwork. Yet smoke can also discourage insects and help preserve roof timbers and thatch against certain pests. Medieval domestic discomfort occasionally produces useful side effects. At the centre of much household activity is the fire. The hearth is heating system, cooking appliance, light source, social centre and constant responsibility. Fuel varies. Wood is valuable and access to woodland can be regulated through customary rights. People gather small as branches, deadwood, brush, and other burnable material where permitted. In some areas, peat or turf may be important. The exact fuel landscape depends heavily upon location. Keeping the hearth alive efficiently is therefore a practical skill. You do not simply throw enormous logs onto it because you enjoy the atmosphere. Fuel represents labour. Someone has cut it, collected it, carried it, dried it, or purchased it. Above the flames, a pot may hang from an iron hook or other support. Metal cookware is valuable, so pottery vessels remain important. Cooking equipment is relatively simple, but simplicity does not mean ignorance. People understand their fires intimately. They know where heat is strongest. They know how quickly particular fuel burns. They know when bread is likely to scorch. They know how to keep a pot simmering. No temperature dial is necessary when you have watched the same flame since childhood. Around you are the possessions of the household. They are fewer than you expect. A wooden chest can be especially important. It stores clothing, cloth, documents, money, or whatever the household considers valuable. Chests are useful because they are storage furniture that can sometimes be moved. There may be stools or benches rather than individual chairs for everyone. A table might be a simple board arrangement rather than the permanent centerpiece familiar from modern dining rooms. Wooden bowls, cups, spoons, baskets, pottery jugs, knives, and cooking vessels fill practical needs. The ordinary knife deserves special attention. You may carry one personally. It is not merely a weapon, it is an everyday tool for cutting food, cord, plants, leather, or whatever else requires a sharp edge. Forks for individual dining are another matter. Your fingers are extremely advanced medieval technology. A spoon handles liquids. A knife cuts solids. Problem solved. Against a wall, bundles, tools, or stored food may occupy precious space. Every object has a purpose because acquiring objects requires money or labor. Something broken is repaired if possible. A cracked wooden item can be patched. Clothing is mended. Iron is reused. Old fabric becomes something else. Waste exists, certainly. But the modern idea of casually throwing away manufactured possessions would seem extraordinary. Now notice the light. There is not much of it. Doorways provide daylight. Small windows or openings may help, sometimes protected by shutters. Wealthier buildings can have more elaborate arrangements, while glass remains far beyond what most rural households expect as an ordinary feature after sunset. Artificial illumination is expensive enough to matter. Candles exist, but their quality varies greatly. Beeswax candles burn pleasantly and are associated particularly with churches and wealthier settings because wax is valuable. Tallow candles, made using animal fat, are cheaper but can smell and smoke. Rushlights offer another possibility. A prepared rush can be coated in fat and burned as a modest source of light. Modest is the important word. Imagine trying to read beneath one. Actually, first imagine owning a book. For most ordinary people, that problem disappears immediately. When darkness comes, the household uses the hearth and whatever additional lighting it can reasonably afford. Work that requires good visibility is easier during daylight. The architecture therefore shapes your schedule. So does sleeping. You look toward the place where you woke earlier. Beds reveal status almost immediately among wealthy people. Elaborate bedsteads, curtains, mattresses, sheets, and coverings can represent serious expense. For ordinary households, arrangements are simpler. Straw makes useful bedding because it traps air and can be replaced. A sack stuffed with straw creates something recognizable as a mattress. Other plant material might also be used. Several people may sleep close together. This is not necessarily regarded as peculiar. Shared sleeping conserves warmth and space. Children sleep near adults. Servants can sleep within the household environment. Travelers at inns may occasionally find themselves sharing arrangements that would horrify a modern hotel reviewer. Your blanket is woolen if fortune allows. Wool dominates because sheep are everywhere in the medieval English economy, and the material is extraordinarily useful. It insulates even in damp conditions and can be produced in different qualities, yet bedding invites unwanted residents. Fleas, lycae, other tiny creatures with absolutely no respect for social rank. People attempt to control pests by cleaning, airing materials, changing bedding fillings, combing hair, and using various herbs or treatments. How effective these measures are depends on circumstances, but medieval people are certainly capable of noticing when insects are biting them. One persistent modern myth imagines that dirt simply accumulates indefinitely indoors because nobody cares. That makes little sense. A household needs sweeping. Ash needs removing. Food waste attracts pests. Bedding needs attention. Utensils need cleaning. The standard of cleanliness is not yours, and sanitation knowledge is very different. But people still recognize unpleasant filth when it begins interfering with daily life. There is another complication. Animals. Depending upon household design and season, animals can be kept close to human living spaces, sometimes under the same overall roof but separated within the structure. Historians and archaeologists study surviving building patterns and excavated evidence to understand these arrangements. and the picture varies considerably across time and place. Livestock are too valuable to dismiss casually. A cow is wealth. An ox is power. A pig converts scraps and forage into food. Chickens produce eggs. Their presence brings warmth, noise, smell, and spectacular disregard for your preferred level of domestic elegance. Outside, village is fully awake now. Footsteps pass the doorway. Someone calls across the settlement. You hear wood striking wood somewhere nearby. The home around you seems rough, dark, smoky, and cramped. Yet it is not merely shelter. It is workshop, kitchen, bedroom, storehouse, family space, protection against weather, and perhaps most importantly, it is a collection of things that required enormous effort to create. Every beam was shaped by hand. Every pot was formed by someone. Every length of cloth took hours of labour. Every repair preserved something that would be difficult to replace. You begin to understand why possessions are treated differently here. The medieval household is not empty because people lack imagination. It is selective because almost everything is expensive in human time. And as you reach for the clothes waiting nearby, you realise that the same is true of what you are about to put on your body. You reach for the clothing waiting nearby, and the first surprise is how familiar the basic logic feels. You need something soft against the skin, something warmer over it, and something reasonably durable between your feet and several acres of enthusiastic English mud. What you do not have is a wardrobe overflowing with choices. For an ordinary person around the year 1200, clothing represents a substantial investment of labour. Before wool becomes the garment in your hands, sheep have been raised and shorn, the fleece has been cleaned and prepared, fibres have been spun into yarn, often through countless hours of repetitive household work. Yarn has been woven into cloth. The cloth may then be fulled, dyed, cut, and sewn, so you do not stare thoughtfully at 3 nearly identical tunics and announce that you have nothing to wear. You wear what you own, closest to the skin. Linen is desirable where it can be afforded. A linen undergarment provides a washable layer between your body and heavier outer clothing. Linen comes from flax, and producing it requires its own long sequence of cultivation and processing. Among men, a basic outfit can include a linen shirt or undertunic beneath a woolen tunic. Leg coverings vary, with hose or separate fitted coverings secured around the waist or to other garments. Brays, a loose form of undergarment, are also part of male dress. For women, a linen shift can sit beneath a longer woolen dress or gown. Precise styles depend on status, place, age, occupation, and changing fashion. Medieval clothing is not frozen for 1,000 years in one vaguely brown costume. People notice fashion, especially wealthy people. Of course they do. Human beings have somehow managed to worry about whether sleeves are fashionable through almost every available century. Around 1200, elite clothing can involve finer cloth, richer dyes, decorative trimming, fur, and carefully fitted garments. Clothing broadcasts status so effectively that authorities in later medieval centuries repeatedly attempt to regulate what different social groups may wear. For you, however, practicality dominates. Wool is your great ally. It keeps you warm, handles damp conditions relatively well, and is available in many qualities. Not all medieval clothing is brown, either. Natural wool provides several shades, but dyes can produce reds, yellows, greens, blues, and other colours depending upon materials, technique, and expense. The poorest person may have limited access to strongly dyed cloth. But the medieval landscape is not populated entirely by people dressed as walking sacks. You pull your garment into place. It has been repaired. There is a patch where the fabric weakened, and perhaps another where an earlier patch weakened after years of service. Nothing embarrassing about that. A damaged garment is still valuable cloth when it becomes too worn for its original purpose. Useful pieces can be cut away and reused. Textile fragments can become patches, bindings, stuffing, cleaning cloths, or other practical materials. You fasten clothing with ties, belts, buckles, pins, or brooches depending upon the garment and your circumstances. Buttons exist historically. But the widespread fitted buttoned clothing, familiar from later medieval fashion, has not yet transformed ordinary wardrobes in quite the same way. Then comes your belt. This is more than decoration, because clothing contains nothing resembling the collection of deep modern pockets you take for granted. A belt becomes useful for carrying everyday objects. A pouch may hang from it. So might your knife. Coins, if you possess them, need somewhere secure. A comb might travel with you. Small tools can be attached or carried according to your work. Then you look downward. Shoes. Medieval footwear is generally made from leather when you can afford proper shoes. Construction techniques vary, but many shoes of this period are relatively soft compared with modern footwear. A common method involves assembling the shoe inside out and then turning it, producing what archaeologists call a turn shoe. It works surprisingly well, until you meet deep mud. There are no waterproof synthetic hiking boots waiting by the door. Leather must be maintained, and footwear wears down quickly under hard use. Soles can require repair. Shoes are valuable enough to be patched rather than discarded casually. You may use wooden overshoes or other protective arrangements in certain circumstances. Though their forms and popularity change through time, your feet remind you constantly what the road surface is doing. Cold, wet, uneven, rocky, muddy. Medieval footwear is intimate with geography. Now comes the question that modern discussions of the Middle Ages seem unable to resist. Do you smell terrible? Well, by modern standards, quite possibly. But the answer is more interesting than the familiar joke. People in medieval England do wash. They wash hands. They wash faces. They wash clothing. Bathing occurs. Towns can contain bathhouses, although their prevalence changes over time and they are more strongly documented in some places than others. Wealthier households can arrange baths using tubs and heated water. Monastic communities develop their own rules and facilities concerning washing. An ordinary rural household can also wash the body without possessing a dedicated bathroom. The problem is convenience. Every bucket of water must come from somewhere. If you want it warm, fuel must heat it. A full bath therefore requires labour. A quick wash requires much less. You can already see which option becomes more common. Soap is known as well. Medieval soap can be made using fats or oils combined with alkaline substances, though quality and availability vary. Other cleansing materials and herbal preparations are used for different purposes. What medieval people lack is your understanding of microorganisms. They do not wash because they know bacteria are multiplying on a surface. They wash because dirt is visible, grease is unpleasant, insects are annoying, smells are noticeable, and social expectations still exist. Yes, other people can smell you. You can smell them too. The entire world simply contains stronger background odours. Wood smoke clings to everyone. Animals fill streets and yards with unmistakable contributions. Leatherworking, food preparation, dung heaps, fish, damp wool, open drains in some towns, and human waste create an aromatic landscape that no modern candle company is rushing to reproduce. Your own body is merely participating. Hair requires attention as well. Combs are common archaeological finds, made from materials such as wood, bone, or antler. Fine-toothed combs can help remove lice and their eggs, because lice are very real companions. Fleas too. You remember the bedding you left moments ago and perhaps resist the urge to scratch. People use combing, washing, laundering, herbs, and other treatments against parasites. Some remedies come from practical observation. Others belong to medical theories that sound far less convincing to modern ears. The distinction is not always obvious to the person using them. A remedy survives because grandmother insists it works. Some grandmothers are right. Some grandmothers are spectacularly confident. Grooming can also carry social meaning. Men's hairstyles and facial hair change with fashion. Clerics can be recognizable through the tonsure. Though exact practices vary, women generally cover their hair in many public contexts, particularly married women, using veils, kerchiefs, or related coverings shaped by status and fashion. For both sexes, clothing communicates identity before anyone speaks. You can often distinguish a labourer from a wealthy landholder through fabric quality and ornament. A cleric may be obvious. A noble household advertises itself through richer materials. Even colours can suggest purchasing power because some dyes are easier and cheaper to produce than others. Yet historians must be cautious when reconstructing ordinary clothing. Much surviving medieval art focuses on religious subjects or elites. Textiles decay easily in the ground. Written records often tell us more about valuable garments than the patched clothing of peasants. Archaeology helps. Manuscripts help. Household accounts help. Legal records occasionally help. But the wardrobe of an ordinary villager in 1200 cannot simply be opened and inventoried for us. You live partly in that uncertainty, and perhaps that is appropriate. Your clothing is not costume. It is equipment. It protects you from weather, identifies your place in society, carries your tools, absorbs smoke from the hearth, gathers mud from the road, and records repairs made by hands that cannot afford waste. Now your stomach interrupts the historical reflection. You have been awake long enough. Someone near the hearth is already handling a pot. There is grain nearby, yesterday's bread perhaps, and almost certainly ale somewhere in the household. You tighten your belt, not because you are fashionable, because breakfast is waiting, and in medieval England the contents of your bowl will tell you almost as much about your life as the clothes on your back. You move toward the hearth as the smell of warm grain begins to overpower the lingering smoke. After the cold floor, scratchy wool, and suspicious possibility of fleas, breakfast feels reassuringly familiar. You are hungry. That, at least, requires no historical explanation. Yet the idea of breakfast itself is less fixed than it is in your world. Medieval eating patterns vary with occupation, season, status, religious practice, and local custom. Some people eat early because hard physical work begins early. Others may have a more substantial meal later in the morning. There is no universal medieval breakfast menu. And there are definitely no tomatoes, no potatoes, no coffee, no tea, no chocolate. Those particular comforts are still waiting beyond oceans and centuries. What you do have is grain. Grain sits near the centre of ordinary English life. Wheat is highly valued, particularly for better bread. But rye, barley, and oats also matter, with regional differences in what grows successfully and what people can afford. For poorer households, bread can be darker and coarser than the fine wheat loaves associated with wealthier tables. But beware another easy modern stereotype. Medieval peasants are not necessarily chewing black bricks full of stones every morning. Grinding grain with millstones can introduce grit, and dental ware provides evidence of abrasive diets. But medieval milling and baking involve real skill. People care whether bread is good. Bakers in towns can even face regulation concerning weight, price, and quality. Bread matters too much to be treated casually. Your loaf may be several days old. That is fine. Stale bread can be softened in liquid or eaten alongside something warm. Food is too precious to reject because it has lost the perfect texture expected by a modern supermarket customer. Beside bread, one of the great foundations of ordinary meals is pottage. Pottage is wonderfully flexible. Imagine a thick soup or stew that changes according to whatever the household has available. Grain can provide body. Peas, beans, onions, leeks, cabbage, herbs, and other vegetables may enter the pot. If fortune smiles, there may be meat or animal fat. If fortune is busy elsewhere, vegetables and grain will do most of the work. The pot can remain near the fire for long periods, with ingredients added as needed. This does not mean one mythical stew bubbles continuously for decades. Despite entertaining stories sometimes told about medieval cooking, pots are emptied and cleaned, but slow cooking makes practical sense. It softens tough ingredients. It requires relatively little equipment. It feeds several people. Most importantly, it produces something warm. You take your portion. The flavour may be better than you expected. Medieval cooking uses herbs extensively. Parsley, sage, garlic, onions, and other locally available flavourings can transform simple ingredients. Wealthier kitchens have access to imported spices such as pepper, cinnamon, ginger, cloves, and saffron. Although these are expensive and become displays of status as much as flavour, the ordinary household works closer to the garden. If you have access to a small plot near the house, it can provide vegetables, herbs, and perhaps fruit. Apples and pears are familiar. Plums and cherries appear. Nuts can supplement the diet. Wild foods may also be gathered where customary rights and local access allow. Then there are peas and beans. These humble foods deserve considerably more respect than history documentaries usually give them. Legumes store well. They provide useful nutrition. They can be dried for winter. They fit beautifully into pottage. A knight charging dramatically across a battlefield looks excellent in a painting. But dried peas probably contribute more consistently to keeping England alive. You eat another spoonful in their honour. Dairy products matter too. Cows, sheep, and goats can provide milk, though fresh milk does not keep for long without refrigeration. Turning milk into cheese or butter extends its usefulness. Cheese is therefore enormously practical. It stores, it travels, it provides concentrated nutrition. Different regions develop their own traditions, though many famous English cheeses you recognise today belong to much later documented forms. Eggs are valuable when hens are laying. Fish becomes particularly important because the church regulates when meat from land animals may be eaten. Medieval religious fasting is more complicated than simply avoiding food altogether. On numerous fast days, restrictions apply to particular foods, especially meat. Fish therefore occupies an enormous place in medieval diets. Freshwater fish may come from rivers, ponds, or managed fish ponds, particularly on wealthy estates and around religious houses. Coastal communities have access to marine catches. Preserved fish can travel inland. Herring becomes especially important. Salted or dried fish can survive journeys that fresh fish cannot. You may discover that medieval Christianity has accidentally arranged for you to become extremely familiar with herring. Meat itself is another area where stereotypes become misleading. Ordinary people do eat meat, but quantity and frequency vary enormously according to wealth, season, local resources, and household circumstances. Pigs are particularly useful. They can forage in woodland where rights permit, consume scraps, and eventually provide meat and fat. Sheep provide wool first and may later provide meat. Cattle are valuable for milk and, especially in the case of oxen, traction, making slaughter an economic decision rather than merely a culinary one. Preservation matters. Without refrigeration, meat can be salted, smoked, or dried. Autumn becomes an important period for slaughtering animals that would be expensive to feed through winter. Preserved supplies then help carry households through colder months. Nothing is wasted lightly. Fat is useful. Bones have uses. Offal can be eaten. Even parts that make your modern breakfast appetites suddenly less enthusiastic may be perfectly sensible food. Then you reach for a drink. Water certainly exists as a beverage. The old claim that medieval people never drink water because all water is universally poisonous is false. People know good water from bad through experience. Springs are valued. Wells provide supplies. Streams can be used where conditions permit. But contamination is a real danger, particularly where settlements are dense or waste management is poor. Ale is extremely common. Medieval ale in England is generally not identical to the hopped beer that becomes increasingly important later. It is made from malted grain and consumed in different strengths. Some household ale can be relatively weak. Children may drink weak ale as part of ordinary domestic consumption, though the precise strength and patterns vary. Brewing is also deeply connected with women's work in many communities. Women known as alewives produce ale for household use and sale, especially before commercial brewing becomes increasingly specialized in later centuries. Quality varies. Authorities sometimes regulate measures and prices. And yes, medieval customers complain when someone sells bad ale. Civilization survives. At wealthier tables, wine appears more often, much of it imported. England's elite participate in extensive trade networks, and wine from regions of France can travel through ports into noble and urban households. For you, ale is more realistic. You drink. It is nourishing as well as refreshing because grain contributes calories. Those calories matter. Your daily work may consume enormous amounts of energy. A modern person sitting at a desk can become nervous about an extra slice of bread. You're about to spend hours walking, lifting, digging, carrying, cutting, hauling, or tending animals. Bread is not the enemy. Winter is. A poor harvest is. A wet summer is. A damaged grain store is. Food security hangs over medieval life in a way that is difficult to feel in a modern supermarket. Harvest yields can vary sharply. Storage losses occur. Grain prices rise after shortages. A household may have enough in one year and struggle in another. True famine is not constant, but anxiety about supply is woven into agricultural existence. The season changes what you eat. Summer can bring fresh produce. Autumn brings harvest, abundance, and slaughter. Winter narrows choices towards stored grain, dried legumes, preserved meat, cheese, and whatever vegetables survive storage. Spring can become particularly uncomfortable. Last year's stores are declining. The new harvest is still far away. This seasonal gap is sometimes called the hungry gap. And although experiences differ, the logic is brutally simple. Your field is full of future food. Future food does not fill today's stomach. Religion adds another rhythm. Feast days interrupt ordinary eating with celebration where resources permit. Weddings, festivals, and major holy days offer opportunities for richer food and communal drinking. These occasions matter because everyday meals are repetitive. Repetition, however, does not mean misery. A hot bowl of pottage after cold labour can be deeply satisfying. Fresh bread smells wonderful in any century. Cheese, onions, and ale beneath summer sunlight require no apology. People enjoy food. They gossip over it. They bargain for it. They celebrate with it. They complain when it is badly prepared. Humanity remains reassuringly consistent. You scrape the last of your meal from the bowl. Outside, the light has strengthened considerably. Breakfast has not been leisurely. The food you've eaten exists because someone ploughed soil, planted seed, weeded fields, harvested grain, threshed it, winnowed it, transported it, milled it, gathered fuel, carried water, and tended the fire. Every mouthful contains labour. And now it is your turn to contribute. Beyond the doorway, the fields are waiting. You step beyond the doorway with breakfast settling warmly inside you. And almost immediately the village seems to pull you toward the fields. This is where much of your life is measured, not by hours on a clock, but by jobs completed, daylight remaining, weather approaching, animals growing restless, and crops moving steadily from seed toward harvest. For most ordinary people in rural England around the year 1200, agriculture shapes the rhythm of existence. You walk toward cultivated land that may look strange to modern eyes, in many regions, especially where open field agriculture develops strongly. Large fields are divided into long, narrow strips cultivated by different households. Your land may not form one convenient rectangle surrounding your cottage. Instead, the strips you work can be scattered, one here, another farther away, another beyond your neighbour's holding. This arrangement develops for complicated reasons involving inheritance, community organisation, soil, ploughing practices, and local custom. Historians continue to debate aspects of how open field systems emerged and changed, because medieval agriculture is never quite as uniform as simple diagrams suggest. The land itself is divided socially as well as physically. Some is held by the lord, some is worked by tenants. Meadows provide hay, pasture supports livestock. Woodland provides fuel and other resources under carefully defined rights. Common land can be essential to households that depend upon grazing animals. And almost every useful piece of the landscape belongs to a web of obligations. You cannot simply point at a pleasant forest and decide that everything inside it is now yours. Custom matters. Rights matter. The Lord matters. So does the village community, which has a surprisingly long memory when someone takes more than custom permits. Your first task depends upon the season. If this is autumn, ploughing may dominate. If spring has arrived, sowing and preparation demand attention. Summer brings weeding, haymaking, and constant concern about weather. Then comes harvest. Harvest is the great agricultural climax. The entire community feels its urgency. But for now, imagine yourself behind a plough. It is heavier and more complicated than the simple wooden stick often shown in crude illustrations of early farming in parts of England. Heavy ploughs equipped with iron components are used to turn difficult soils. Elsewhere, lighter equipment may suit local conditions. Oxen provide much of the pulling power. Horses are increasingly important in medieval agriculture too, especially as improvements in harnessing and the use of horseshoes make them valuable working animals. Though the balance between horses and oxen differs across regions and households, oxen are slow, very slow, patiently, magnificently slow. They do not care about your schedule. You guide the team while another person may help control the animals. The plough cuts through the earth, turning soil into long ridges. Again, and again, and again. A field that looks peaceful from a hill becomes enormous when you must cross every part of it on foot. Your hands ache. Mud collects around your footwear. The wooden handle rubs your palms. The ox ahead of you develops strong opinions about direction. You begin to understand why breakfast contains so much grain. Agricultural labour is repetitive, but it is not mindless. You watch the soil. You understand where water gathers. You notice where the seed is germinating properly. You recognize the behavior of animals. You know when weather is changing because your livelihood depends upon noticing before the rain arrives. This practical knowledge is rarely written down by the people who possess it. Most ordinary farmers cannot leave detailed manuals explaining exactly how they judge a field. Their expertise travels through demonstration, memory, habit, family teaching, and community tradition. A child learns by watching, then helping, then doing. Knowledge becomes almost physical. You know how heavy a tool should feel. You know the sound of a healthy animal. You know whether hay is dry enough by touching it. You know when grain looks ready. Modern historians can reconstruct techniques through written estate records, archaeology, surviving tools, artwork, environmental evidence, and later agricultural traditions. But much ordinary expertise disappears silently. The people using it never imagined someone 8 centuries later would want instructions. As the morning advances, other villagers work nearby. Agriculture is a household effort. Men, women, and children all contribute, though tasks are shaped by age, strength, gender expectations, custom, and season. Women perform extensive agricultural labour alongside domestic work. They weed, they gather, they tend livestock, they process dairy products, they participate in harvest, they brew, they spin, they prepare food. And because spinning can be done around other activities, it consumes astonishing quantities of time across a lifetime. Children work too. Childhood exists emotionally, certainly. Parents care about children, mourn them, play with them, and worry about them. But childhood is not protected from useful labour in the modern sense. A young child can scare birds from crops. An older one can tend animals. Skills begin early because survival depends upon household cooperation. And then there are the animals. Your medieval farm is powered partly by muscle that is not human. Oxen pull, horses carry and pull, cows provide milk, sheep provide wool, pigs forage, chickens wander with an almost supernatural ability to stand precisely where someone is trying to walk. Animals represent wealth, but they also create constant work. They become sick, they escape, they require fodder, they damage crops. They reproduce at inconvenient moments, and they occasionally die despite everything you do. Veterinary knowledge exists largely through experience and traditional remedies. Some treatments are practical, others combine observation with medical theories or beliefs that would not survive modern testing. Yet losing an animal can be economically devastating. An ox is not merely a large pet, It is agricultural machinery with horns. The year itself becomes your great calendar. Ploughing, sowing, weeding, haymaking, harvesting, threshing, winnowing, repairing, feeding, slaughtering, storing, then preparing to begin again. The church calendar overlays this agricultural cycle with saints' days, festivals, fasts, and holy seasons. Certain dates become convenient markers for rents, contracts, employment, and customary activities. You may not say that something happens on a particular numerical date with modern precision. You might think of it in relation to a feast day everyone recognizes. The natural and sacred calendars overlap. Around midday, you rest briefly. Perhaps bread appears again, cheese, onions, ale, nothing elaborate. You sit near the field and look across the strips. The landscape seems calm, but beneath that calm is anxiety. Weather controls everything. Too much rain can ruin crops. Too little rain can weaken them. A storm at the wrong moment can flatten grain. Cold can arrive early. Seed can fail. Animals can consume what they should not. Then there are pests. Birds, mice, insects, plant diseases that nobody understands scientifically. You cannot check a forecast. You cannot ensure the harvest through a modern agricultural corporation. You can pray. You can observe. You can prepare. And then you wait. This uncertainty helps explain why medieval religious life is so closely connected with agriculture. Blessings, processions, prayers, saints, and rituals provide spiritual meaning in a world where forces beyond human control determine whether children eat comfortably in February. Still, ordinary years are not constant disasters. Crops grow, people adapt. Medieval agriculture around 1200 is capable of supporting expanding towns and a growing population. New land is being cultivated in many places. Mills process grain more efficiently. Markets connect rural producers with wider networks. There is innovation here. Slow innovation, perhaps, but real. The heavy plough, improved harness systems, watermills, windmills in some areas, crop rotations, and changing patterns of land use all contribute to productivity. The old image of medieval peasants mechanically repeating unchanged farming methods for centuries does them little justice. People experiment when experiment might improve survival. They are cautious because failed experiments can also mean hunger. By afternoon, your muscles have begun negotiating terms of surrender. There is still work. Tools need maintenance. Fences may require repair. Animals need moving. Depending upon your status, you may also owe labour services to the Lord. That obligation can mean working not only your own strips but also land whose harvest benefits someone much wealthier than you. It is difficult to romanticize that while your back hurts. Yet even these duties vary widely. Medieval peasants occupy many legal and economic positions. Some are relatively free tenants. Others are bound by heavier customary obligations. Some possess substantial holdings and livestock. Others survive with very little land. The word peasant hides enormous differences. One household may employ labourers during harvest. Another may depend upon neighbours simply to survive. And neighbours matter because certain jobs cannot wait. When harvest arrives, grain must be gathered while weather permits. Everyone works. The fields fill with people cutting stalks using sickles, binding sheaves, gathering scattered grain, carrying loads, and watching the sky. Harvest can be exhausting. It can also be social. Food and drink may improve during intensive work. Conversation travels along the field. Songs may accompany repetitive tasks. Young people meet. Old arguments continue. Someone inevitably works more slowly than everyone else and has excellent reasons for it. By evening, you turn back toward the village. Your clothing carries dust and soil. Your hands feel rough. The comfortable image of a peaceful medieval countryside has become more complicated. The fields are beautiful. They are also demanding. They feed you only because bodies repeatedly transform human effort into food. Yet you do not work entirely alone. The people scattered across those narrow strips share tools, animals, obligations, gossip, risks, and memories. As you approach the first houses, voices drift toward you. The village is gathering itself again after the day's labour, and you're about to discover that surviving medieval England depends almost as much upon those neighbours as it does upon the soil beneath your feet. You follow the familiar track back between the houses, carrying the day's dirt on your shoes and the pleasant heaviness of work in your arms. Around you, other people are returning too. Animals are being driven toward enclosures. Children move between doorways, smoke hangs above the roofs. Someone calls your name. There is no hiding. Your village knows you. More importantly, it knows about you. In a small medieval community, reputation functions almost like another possession. Your neighbours know whether you repay debts, whether your animals wander into other people's crops, whether you work reliably at harvest, whether your family keeps agreements, and probably whether you said something foolish after too much ale at the last feast. Privacy exists, of course, but not in the comfortable anonymity of a modern city. You live among people you may have known since childhood. Their parents knew your parents. Their children work beside your children. Landholding arrangements place your strips near theirs. Animals share grazing areas. Everyone uses roads, water sources, mills, churches, and other common spaces. This closeness can feel restrictive. It can also keep you alive. Imagine that your ox becomes sick just before ploughing. You cannot order another one. A neighbour may help. Imagine your roof is damaged. Several hands can repair it faster than one household working alone. During harvest, cooperation becomes especially important because ripe grain does not politely wait until everyone has finished their individual schedules. Communities develop systems of mutual assistance because they must. That does not mean everyone likes everyone else. Absolutely not. Medieval villagers are still human beings. They argue about boundaries. They argue about debts. They argue about animals. They argue about inheritance. They argue about damaged crops, access to resources, marriage promises, insults, unpaid work, and occasionally things so petty that 800 years later the surviving record makes you feel unexpectedly close to them. Court records from medieval England preserve fragments of these conflicts. A pig wanders somewhere it should not. Someone damages a hedge. Someone fails to pay. Someone uses land another person claims. Someone insults someone else. The disagreement eventually becomes serious enough to enter a legal record. And there, suddenly, ordinary people appear, not as anonymous peasants in the background of a king's reign, but as individuals annoyed about a fence. History becomes wonderfully small. Your own household sits inside this web of relationships. Marriage is particularly important. For ordinary people, marriage can unite affection, labour, property, family strategy, and economic survival. The Church increasingly insists upon its authority over marriage, emphasizing consent between the couple as central to a valid union. This produces an interesting complication. Families may have strong opinions about whom you should marry, very strong opinions, but medieval canon law increasingly recognizes that the consent of the man and woman matters. In theory, two people can create a valid marriage through mutual consent even without the elaborate wedding ceremony you might imagine. In practice, secret or disputed marriages create obvious problems. Was consent really given? Were witnesses present? Had someone already promised marriage elsewhere? Church courts spend considerable energy untangling such questions, so public ceremonies and witnesses become extremely useful. A wedding is also a community event. Food appears, ale flows, families gather. Music and dancing may accompany celebration where circumstances allow. Even modest households can mark important life transitions with communal ritual, because life here is not simply work followed by more work. People celebrate. This point is easily lost when medieval history becomes a catalogue of disease, warfare, taxation, and uncomfortable toilets. There are feast days, church festivals, weddings, seasonal gatherings, markets, games, music, storytelling, dancing. People gamble despite clerical disapproval. Children play. Adults play too, although adults have always been remarkably skilled at giving games more respectable names. Ball games exist in various forms. Wrestling is popular. Archery becomes increasingly significant, particularly in later medieval England, though bows are already familiar tools and weapons in your period. Dice are wonderfully dangerous little objects. Board games such as tables, related distantly to backgammon, are known. Wealthier households enjoy chess, which has spread through medieval Europe and carries associations with elite culture. Ordinary entertainment requires less equipment. A story costs nothing. A song can travel from one village to another. Musicians appear at celebrations. Travellers bring news. Someone who has visited a distant town may suddenly become the most interesting person beside the fire. And news matters enormously because your information network is human. There is no newspaper arriving every morning. No screen announces events from London. Information travels through priests, merchants, officials, pilgrims, travellers, servants, soldiers, and ordinary people moving between communities. Rumour travels even faster. A royal event can take time to reach you. A scandal involving your neighbour can cross the village before breakfast. Some technologies require no improvement. Children occupy a particularly interesting place in this social world. Medieval families are often imagined as emotionally distant because child mortality is high. Older scholarship sometimes suggested that parents could not afford deep emotional attachment to children who might die young. Evidence has complicated that idea considerably. Medieval parents grieve children. They make sacrifices for them. They arrange their futures. They worry about their behaviour. Religious texts, letters, legal records, archaeology, and memorial practices all suggest emotional family bonds that feel recognisably human. But childhood is shorter in practical terms. Children gradually join the working world. They tend animals, gather fuel, carry water, help with food preparation, learn crafts, and absorb agricultural knowledge. As they grow older, some leave home for service or apprenticeship. A household. A household may feel like the centre of your world, but it does not stand alone. The strips you cultivate, the animals you graze, the timber you gather, even the path beneath your feet exist inside a larger structure of rights and obligations. Somewhere above you in that structure stands a lord. You may rarely see him. You certainly feel him. Around the year 1200, much of rural England is organised through manors, although their size, structure, customs, and ownership vary enormously. A manor is not simply a large house occupied by an unpleasant nobleman who spends his mornings inventing taxes. It is an economic and legal unit. It can contain cultivated land, pasture, meadow, woodland, mills, houses, workshops, and rights over local resources. Some manors belong to secular nobles, others belong to bishops, monasteries, cathedral institutions, or even the crown. The lord may live nearby, or not. A wealthy noble can hold estates scattered across different regions, moving between residences while officials supervise local affairs. For you, those officials may matter more than the distant owner. A reeve can oversee agricultural organisation. Other officers collect dues, supervise work, manage resources, and represent the lord's interests. Their names and precise responsibilities vary. Their ability to make your afternoon irritating does not. Your relationship with the manor depends heavily upon your legal status. This is where the simple image of the medieval peasant begins falling apart again. Some rural people are free tenants. Others hold land under forms of unfree tenure and owe significant customary services. Terms such as villain appear in records. But categories can be messy. A person's obligations might depend upon local custom rather than a perfectly standardized national system. You may owe rent in money, or produce, or labour, perhaps some combination. You might provide grain, eggs, animals, or other goods at particular times. You might owe several days of work on the lord's domain, meaning land whose produce belongs directly to the lord. Imagine the frustration. Your own field needs attention. The weather looks uncertain, but customary obligation requires you to spend the day working somebody else's land. The Lord's harvest does not become less important simply because yours is also ready. These labour services can be particularly demanding during ploughing and harvest. Over time, Many obligations are increasingly converted into cash payments, especially as markets and monetary exchange expand. But this process is uneven and far from complete around 1200. Money itself is becoming increasingly important. Silver pennies dominate ordinary English coinage. Large transactions can be calculated in shillings and pounds, though those units are generally accounting values rather than the everyday coins you imagine pulling from a purse. A pound contains 20 shillings. A shilling contains 12 pennies. You immediately begin missing decimal currency. Coins matter because rents, fines, purchases, tolls, and market transactions increasingly connect rural life to a wider economy. But many obligations still exist through goods and labour. Your household therefore balances several economies at once. You produce food. You exchange labour. You owe customary services. You sell surplus when possible. You purchase things you cannot produce. And occasionally someone in authority announces that you owe something else. Kings have also discovered taxation around 1200. England's monarchy possesses a relatively sophisticated administrative system by medieval standards. Royal officials, sheriffs, courts, written records, and financial institutions allow kings to reach deeply into local society when they need resources, and kings often need resources. War is expensive. Diplomacy is expensive. Castles are expensive. Royal households are expensive. King John, who takes the throne shortly before the turn of the century, will become especially famous for financial pressure and disputes with his subjects. His reign eventually contributes to the crisis-producing Magna Carta in the year 1215. But you are not living inside a textbook that knows what comes next. You simply experience demands as they arrive. The manor has another important function: justice. Local disputes can be handled in manorial courts, where tenants appear, customary rules are enforced, property transfers recorded, fines imposed, and community obligations discussed. These courts reveal something fascinating about medieval rural society. Custom is powerful. People remember what has traditionally been allowed, who may graze animals where, who owes which service, who inherits a holding, who failed to maintain a ditch, who allowed livestock to damage crops. The court turns local memory into enforceable practice. You may even participate through a jury or group of local men expected to present offences and provide knowledge about the community. This does not make the system democratic in the modern sense. The lord possesses enormous advantages, but villagers are not simply silent objects beneath arbitrary power either. They negotiate. They resist. They appeal to custom. They avoid obligations when they think they can get away with it. Human creativity flourishes beautifully whenever rent is involved. Inheritance creates further complications. A holding does not necessarily pass according to one universal rule. Local customs differ in some places. The eldest son may be favoured. Elsewhere, different patterns can exist. Widows can possess important rights to land or income, though their position depends upon tenure, marriage arrangements, and local law. When a tenant dies, the heir may owe a payment before taking possession. Marriage can also involve payments or permissions under some forms of unfree tenure. This means family decisions are inseparable from land. Whom you marry can affect property. How many children survive can affect inheritance. Whether a widow remarries can affect household strategy. A strip of soil is not merely dirt. It is security, status, food, obligation, and sometimes conflict. You walk past a boundary marker that looks almost laughably insignificant. Perhaps a ditch, a ridge, a hedge, a particular tree. Yet everyone nearby knows what it means. Move that boundary quietly and you may discover just how excellent medieval villagers are at remembering where it stood before. Social rank surrounds you beyond the manor too. At the bottom are people with little or no land who survive through labour and service. Above them are peasants with varying holdings and resources. Then come local elites, prosperous freeholders, clergy, knights, lesser nobles, and great magnates whose estates can stretch across counties. At the summit stands the king, But wealth and legal status do not always align neatly. A technically unfree tenant can sometimes be economically comfortable. A free person can be desperately poor. A prosperous peasant might own animals, employ labour, and possess more practical security than someone whose legal status sounds superior. Medieval hierarchy is rigid in principle and surprisingly complicated in practice. The church adds another layer. Ecclesiastical institutions own enormous amounts of land. A monastery can therefore be your landlord just as easily as a knight. This does not automatically make your obligations gentle. Monks require income too. Religious landlords keep accounts, enforce rights, collect rents, and manage estates with impressive attention to detail. Apparently, spiritual salvation and agricultural bookkeeping coexist perfectly well. Toward evening, you may hear discussion of a dispute heading toward the manor court. Perhaps someone's animals entered another person's field. Perhaps a tenant failed to perform required labour. Perhaps ale was sold using an incorrect measure. Everyone has an opinion. The court will have one too. And suddenly, the village relationships you encountered earlier look different. Your neighbours are companions, witnesses, competitors, relatives, creditors, and sometimes the people who will stand before a court and explain exactly what you did. Community protects you. Community also watches you. Above it all sits authority, layered from village custom through manor, church, county, and crown. You are not free in the modern political sense. Your movement and choices can be restricted by obligations inherited with your social position. Yet neither are you completely powerless. Custom provides expectations. Community provides leverage. Land provides bargaining value. Markets provide opportunities. And over generations, people continually negotiate the boundaries of what authority can demand. For tonight, though, nobody's discussing political philosophy. A bell sounds across the settlement. Heads turn almost automatically toward the church. The fields, rents, courts, and obligations of your earthly life remain important. But another authority claims something deeper than labour or silver. It claims your soul, and as the bell carries over the rooftops, the medieval world around you becomes inseparable from faith. The bell carries beyond the rooftops and across the fields, its sound fading slowly into the evening air. You have heard bells all your life here. They announce worship, mark important moments, gather communities, warn of danger, accompany death, and give shape to time itself. You turn toward the church almost without thinking, around the year 1200. Christianity is not simply one part of medieval life that you can neatly separate from work, family, politics, medicine, or law. It surrounds them all. You are born into a world understood as Christian. Soon after birth, baptism brings you formally into the church. Marriage increasingly falls under ecclesiastical authority. Confession, penance, fasting, feast days, mass, burial, and prayers for the dead accompany the stages of life. And beyond death waits eternity. That thought has weight here. Heaven is real to you. Hell is real. Sin has consequences. Saints can intercede. Miracles are possible. The invisible world is not a poetic metaphor. It is part of reality. You approach the village church, depending upon where you live. The building may be modest or surprisingly impressive. The great rebuilding movement following the Norman conquest has transformed England's religious landscape. Stone churches, monasteries, cathedrals, and abbeys rise across the country. Your local church might contain older architectural elements alongside newer work. The doorway itself can feel imposing. Inside, the atmosphere changes. The air is cooler. Light enters through relatively small openings. Smoke from lamps and candles leaves traces above. Painted decoration may cover surfaces that modern visitors often imagine as bare stone. This is worth remembering. Medieval churches can be colourful. Walls may carry images of biblical stories, saints, judgment, heaven, hell, and moral lessons. Statues and painted objects provide visual narratives for a population in which literacy is limited. You do not need to read a manuscript to recognize St. Peter carrying keys. Images teach, ritual teaches, repetition teaches. You know the stories because you have heard them again and again. The service itself is conducted largely in Latin. You probably do not understand every word, yet that does not make the ritual meaningless. You recognize movements, sounds, objects, familiar prayers, the elevation of sacred elements, the rhythm of the church year. Religion is learned through the body as much as through explanation. You stand, you kneel, you cross yourself, you watch, you listen, you smell incense on important occasions. The priest occupies a special position within the community, ideally. He provides spiritual guidance, administers sacraments, teaches basic doctrine, and lives according to clerical expectations. Reality is less tidy. Some priests are educated, others possess modest learning, some are diligent, some are not. Church reformers repeatedly complain about clerical behaviour, which is useful evidence that medieval clergy do not all behave like serene figures in illuminated manuscripts. Human beings have entered the institution. Complications follow. Your parish also has economic claims. The tithe traditionally requires a portion of agricultural production to support the church. Though arrangements and enforcement vary, offerings, dues, and customary payments connect spiritual institutions to ordinary household finances. You may sincerely believe in the church and still complain about what it costs. These positions are perfectly compatible. The calendar gives something back. Saints' days and major festivals break the agricultural year into recognizable pieces. Christmas, Easter, Pentecost, local feast days, and other observances bring rituals, gatherings, and sometimes relief from ordinary labor. Fasting creates another rhythm. On designated days and seasons, particular foods are restricted. Meat may disappear from the table while fish becomes important. The rules can be detailed. The wealthy sometimes find creative ways to maintain luxurious meals while technically respecting restrictions. Apparently, loopholes also have a medieval history, but faith reaches far beyond formal church rules. Suppose you're sick. You might seek herbs from someone with practical knowledge. You might ask for prayers. You might visit a saint's shrine. You might carry an object believed to provide protection. None of these actions necessarily feels contradictory. The categories you use in the modern world, religion here, medicine there, superstition somewhere else, do not divide experience so neatly. A saint can be associated with particular illnesses or dangers. Relics are believed to carry sacred power through their connection with holy people. Pilgrims travel to shrines seeking healing, forgiveness, spiritual merit, or assistance. England is filled with pilgrimage destinations. Canterbury has become particularly famous after the murder of Archbishop Thomas Becket in the year 1170. His shrine attracts pilgrims from across society. Stories of miracles associated with Becket spread rapidly. To you, such reports do not automatically sound absurd. Why should the world be closed to miracles? God created it. Saints stand close to God. The logic is coherent within your understanding of reality. Yet belief is never completely uniform. Medieval theologians debate difficult questions. Church authorities worry about practices they consider improper. Ordinary people preserve customs whose origins may stretch beyond formal Christian teaching. Charms offer a fascinating example. A charm might include Christian words, prayers, crosses, sacred names, fragments of Latin, herbal knowledge, or formulas whose origins are harder to identify. Is it religion, medicine, magic? The person using it may not care about your classification. They care whether the fever goes away. Some practices clearly trouble church authorities. Divination, certain forms of magic, and attempts to command supernatural forces can be condemned. But the boundary between approved blessing and forbidden magic is not always obvious at village level. You might believe that particular days are lucky or dangerous. Dreams may carry meaning. Strange natural events can feel like warnings. An unusual birth, comet, eclipse, storm, or unexplained sound may invite interpretation. The natural world is full of messages if you believe creation itself reflects divine order. This does not mean medieval people are incapable of practical reasoning. If your roof leaks, you repair it. You do not simply pray at the hole. If an animal escapes, you search for it. If grain is wet, you try to dry it. Practical action and supernatural belief exist comfortably beside each other. You can repair the roof and ask a saint for better weather. Why choose? Death makes spiritual concerns especially immediate. You have seen it often enough. Infants die. Adults die from infections that modern medicine could treat. Accidents happen. Childbirth carries danger. A seemingly minor illness can become serious. Death is not hidden in distant institutions. It enters homes. The dying may receive religious rites where possible. Family and neighbours gather. Bells can announce a death. The body is prepared for burial, and prayers continue afterward. Burial in consecrated ground matters deeply. So do prayers for the soul around your period. Theological ideas concerning purification after death are developing toward what later becomes more formally defined as purgatory. Medieval Christians increasingly emphasize prayers, masses, and charitable acts performed for the dead. This strengthens connections between generations. Your responsibility to family does not necessarily end when they die. The dead remain part of the spiritual community. That can be comforting. It can also be unsettling on a dark winter night when someone tells a story about a restless spirit. Medieval ghost stories exist. Some describe the dead returning because something remains unresolved. Others serve moral or religious purposes. Scholars debate how much older folklore survives within these traditions and how thoroughly Christian ideas reshape them. Around the household fire, nobody's conducting that scholarly debate. Someone simply says they saw something near the churchyard. Everyone becomes quieter. You might laugh softly, preferably after returning indoors. Religious institutions also connect your small village to an enormous world. Monasteries preserve books and learning. Clerics participate in administration. Bishops influence politics. The Pope in Rome claims authority across Western Christendom. Crusading movements connect England with warfare thousands of miles away. Pilgrims travel internationally. Ideas move between universities, monasteries, royal courts, and cathedral schools. You may never travel farther than a nearby market town. Yet spiritually you belong to a community stretching far beyond England. The church bell therefore means several things at once. Time, authority, community, fear, hope, habit, memory. You step outside again. The light has changed. Nearby, people exchange greetings before separating toward their homes. Someone discusses a feast day approaching. Someone else needs to visit a market. That word catches your attention. Market. Because despite all the fields surrounding you, medieval England is not isolated into thousands of self-sufficient villages. Goods move. Money moves. Craftspeople specialize. Towns are expanding. And tomorrow, if you follow the road far enough, the quiet village landscape will give way to something much louder, tighter, smellier, and unexpectedly energetic. By the time you follow the road toward town, the quiet rhythm of the fields has begun to loosen around you. More travellers appear. A cart creaks ahead. Pack animals carry goods. Someone drives livestock in the same direction, creating the sort of slow-moving traffic problem that apparently requires no motor engine to become irritating. Then the road narrows between buildings. The sound changes first. Hammering, voices, animals, wheels grinding over uneven ground, vendors calling, church bells somewhere beyond the roofs. You have entered one of medieval England's growing towns. Around the year 1200, England remains overwhelmingly rural, but towns are increasingly important. London is by far the largest urban centre, perhaps containing tens of thousands of inhabitants, though historians disagree about precise population estimates. Other places such as York, Winchester, Lincoln, Norwich, Oxford, Bristol, and Exeter serve as regional centres of trade, government, religion, or craft production. Many smaller market towns connect surrounding villages with this expanding commercial world. Your town may not be enormous. It does not need to be. After village life, even a few crowded streets feel busy. Buildings press close to the roadway. Timber construction is common, though stone appears in churches, defensive structures, important houses, bridges, and commercial buildings where wealth allows. Work happens openly. A craftsman's shop may face the street, allowing customers to see goods being produced. You pass a smith. The sound announces him long before you arrive. Metal striking metal. A burst of sparks. Heat rolling from the forge. Blacksmiths produce and repair tools, fittings, horseshoes, nails, and countless objects necessary to a society increasingly dependent upon iron. Their work requires specialized skill. So does almost everything else around you. There are carpenters, shoemakers, leather workers, potters, bakers, butchers, brewers, weavers, fullers who process cloth, dyers who transform it with colours that can leave their working spaces smelling memorable for all the wrong reasons. Craft specialisation is one of the great differences between town and village. In your rural household, people perform many different tasks because they must. Here, a person can spend years becoming extremely good at one. The organisation of crafts around 1200 is developing rapidly. Associations of merchants and craftspeople exist in various forms, though the fully structured guild system familiar from later medieval centuries should not simply be projected backward unchanged. Still, regulation matters. Town authorities and occupational groups care about standards, prices, weights, measures, training, and competition. Nobody wants a baker selling undersized loaves, except perhaps the baker. Bread is too important for that. Royal regulations such as the assize of bread will formalise relationships between grain prices and loaf standards during the 13th century, reflecting a broader medieval concern with fair measures and market order. You reach the marketplace. Now the town truly comes alive. Grain, fish, cheese, eggs, vegetables, cloth, leather goods, pots, tools, salt, animals, small manufactured objects. Imported goods appear beside local produce. Coins pass from hand to hand. People bargain. Some transactions may still involve payment through goods or credit arrangements, but money has become increasingly important. A silver penny can be divided physically when smaller values are required. Literally divided. A coin may be cut into halves or quarters. You suddenly appreciate small change. The market also reveals how far medieval trade can reach. Most goods around you come from relatively nearby because transport is expensive, but not everything. Wine can arrive from continental Europe. Fine cloth travels considerable distances. Salt moves through commercial networks. Spices from much farther away eventually reach wealthy English kitchens through chains of merchants stretching across continents. Your village may feel isolated, but the economy is not sealed. England exports too. Wool is becoming one of the kingdom's great commercial resources. English wool develops an excellent reputation, especially the finer varieties produced in certain regions. Merchants carry it toward continental textile centres. Over time, the wool trade will become enormously important to royal finance and private fortunes. The sheep you passed yesterday is participating in international commerce. It looks completely unimpressed. Near the market, you notice another important institution, an inner alehouse. Hospitality takes many forms. Travellers can find lodging in religious houses, private homes, inns, or establishments serving drink, depending upon place, status, and circumstance. Urban drinking spaces are centres of information as much as refreshment. Merchants talk. Travellers exchange stories. Workers gather. Deals are made. Rumours flourish. The ale may be excellent, or it may explain why authorities repeatedly inspect measures and quality. Women remain particularly prominent in brewing and selling ale during this period. Some produce small quantities alongside other household work. Others participate more substantially in commercial activity. Women's economic roles are broader than the simplified image of a medieval wife permanently sitting beside a spinning wheel. Women sell goods, manage households, brew, bake, work in textiles, serve customers. Labour in agriculture. Act as servants. Some continue businesses after a husband's death. Legal restrictions and social expectations certainly limit opportunities, especially in comparison with men. But medieval urban economies depend heavily upon women's work. You continue through the street, and now your nose becomes involved. Town sanitation is complicated. The old image of every medieval street permanently flowing with human waste is exaggerated. Authorities do attempt to regulate rubbish and nuisances. Householders can be expected to manage waste. Certain trades are pushed toward particular areas because of smell or pollution. But regulation exists partly because problems are real. Animals leave dung. Butchers produce waste. Food scraps accumulate. Drainage is imperfect. People empty unpleasant things. Mud combines with everything. Open channels may carry wastewater. In warm weather, the smell can become formidable. You carefully choose where to step. Pigs may wander through some urban spaces, though towns regulate livestock because roaming animals create obvious trouble. Dogs appear too. Horses and carts compete with pedestrians. There is no pavement separating you safely from traffic. You simply pay attention. Fire is another constant urban fear. Timber buildings stand close together. Hearths burn every day. Workshops use flames. Roofs may be thatched. One careless spark can threaten several households. Towns therefore develop rules about fires and building practices, though enforcement varies. Night brings additional restrictions. Gates may close in walled towns. Curfews can require fires to be covered or controlled. The word associated with curfew itself develops from the idea of covering the fire. Darkness changes urban life quickly. Before that happens, you watch an apprentice carrying materials into a workshop. Apprenticeship offers young people a path into skilled work. A child or adolescent may leave the parental household and live with a master for years, receiving training alongside food, lodging, discipline, and plenty of labour. The arrangement is educational. It is also demanding. The master exercises authority over the apprentice's behaviour. Running away is generally considered a poor career strategy. Literacy is more visible in town as well. Clerks write documents. Merchants increasingly rely upon records. Church institutions require educated personnel. Schools exist in association with cathedrals, monasteries, and towns. Oxford is already emerging as an important centre of learning around your period, with masters and students forming the community that will become its university. You may never read a book yourself, but writing increasingly shapes the world around you. Contracts, counts, charters, court records, royal orders. The written word is becoming another form of power. As afternoon begins fading, you stand near the edge of the market and listen. The town is noisy, dirty, crowded, inventive, commercial, and alive. It offers opportunities unavailable in the village. A skilled craft, wage labour, trade, education for a fortunate few, connections to distant places. It also offers disease, expensive food, fire risk, crowding, crime, and the uncomfortable experience of living extremely close to strangers. You find yourself almost missing the fields. Almost. But returning home means taking the road again. You tighten your cloak, check the pouch at your belt, and look beyond the last houses toward the track disappearing into the countryside. There are no streetlights waiting out there, no road signs, no reliable map in your pocket, and daylight is already becoming precious. You leave the last crowded buildings behind, and almost immediately the noise of the town begins to thin. Hammering fades. Market voices disappear. The smell improves considerably, which feels like a small personal victory. Ahead, the road stretches through open country. Calling it a road may be generous. Some important routes are substantial and well-travelled. And England still uses portions of the road network inherited from Roman Britain. Yet many local routes are track shaped by generations of feet, hooves, carts, weather, and repeated attempts to avoid yesterday's mud. There is no national network of smooth-paved highways. Maintenance is local and inconsistent. A road that behaves perfectly well in dry summer weather can become a miserable ribbon of mud after prolonged rain. Wheels sink. Animals struggle. Travellers search for firmer ground beside the established track, gradually widening it. You quickly understand why water transport matters so much. Whenever rivers and coastal routes permit, moving heavy goods by boat can be far easier than dragging them overland. Ports, navigable rivers, bridges, ferries, and landing places therefore become important points in England's commercial geography. But you are walking. For an ordinary traveller, your own feet remain wonderfully affordable transportation. 10 or 15 miles in a day can be realistic depending upon conditions, health, load, and urgency. A determined traveller on good roads may cover more. Horses increase speed, especially for messengers or wealthy travellers who can obtain fresh mounts. But medieval travel is rarely about maximum speed. It is about reaching the destination before something becomes inconvenient. Darkness, weather, a swollen river, a lame horse, a closed gate, or your feet deciding they have resigned. You pass a wayside cross. Such landmarks help orient travellers. So do churches, hills, rivers, distinctive trees, settlements, and local knowledge. Detailed portable maps are not ordinary possessions. You navigate through remembered routes and spoken directions. Ask someone how to reach the next village, and the answer may rely upon landmarks. Follow this road. Cross the stream. Pass the church. Turn near the wood. If you reach the mill, you've gone too far. This works perfectly well until fog arrives. Travel also requires permission or documentation in certain contexts, though ordinary movement is not universally prohibited. Your legal status matters. Some unfree tenants may face restrictions or obligations tying them more closely to a manor. Others move for work, trade, marriage, pilgrimage, military service, or seasonal labour. Medieval people are more mobile than the stereotype suggests. Merchants travel regularly. Clergy move between institutions. Messengers cross the kingdom. Craftspeople seek work. Students travel to centres of learning. Pilgrims undertake journeys that can carry them astonishing distances. Soldiers move wherever someone with authority has decided soldiers are required. Even peasants can relocate, though economic and legal obstacles may make that difficult. You hear hoofbeats behind you and step aside. A mounted traveller passes. Owning a riding horse is expensive. The animal requires food, equipment, care, and somewhere to stay. Wealthier travellers may ride with servants or companions. Travelling alone is possible, but companionship has advantages. Stories about medieval roads often make every hedge sound as though it contains 6 professional robbers waiting patiently for you. The reality is less theatrical. Robbery is a genuine concern. So is theft. But most journeys do not end with dramatic ambushes. The greater risks are often ordinary. Bad weather, accidents, getting lost, injury, illness, river crossings, poor roads, finding shelter. Still, carrying valuable goods makes you attractive to criminals, and isolated routes can be dangerous. Travellers therefore join groups when convenient. A merchant convoy has safety in numbers. Pilgrims can travel together. Friends accompany one another between communities. You may also carry your everyday knife, though it is a tool before it is a guarantee of personal safety. The landscape ahead becomes wooded. Now another medieval concept enters your journey. Forest. A royal forest is not simply an area covered with trees. It is a legal designation. Forest law protects particular animals and their habitats for royal hunting, and imposes special restrictions on activities within designated territories. A royal forest can include woodland, fields, villages, and open ground. This surprises you because modern language has changed the meaning, if you live within or near such an area. Rules governing hunting and use of resources can affect daily life. Deer are particularly protected. You may look at one and see meat. The law looks at one and sees the king's meat. The law has more armed employees. Best admire it from a distance. Local people can possess customary rights to gather wood, graze animals, or use forest resources in particular ways. But unauthorized hunting can bring serious penalties. Popular stories sometimes exaggerate the severity or uniformity of forest punishments, especially when later legends are projected backward. Enforcement changes across reigns and places. Still, royal forests generate resentment because they place valuable resources under privileged control. The figure of the outlaw thrives naturally in this landscape. An outlaw is not necessarily a romantic rebel living cheerfully beneath an oak tree and redistributing wealth with excellent archery. Legally, outlawry can place someone outside normal protections after failure to answer legal proceedings. Life in that position is precarious. Robin Hood traditions will develop later and accumulate stories over centuries. The familiar heroic outlaw you know cannot simply be dropped unchanged into England in 1200. The real countryside is less tidy than legend. You emerge from the trees and approach water. There is no bridge. Wonderful. A ferry operates here. River crossings shape routes because safe crossing points are limited. Bridges are expensive to build and maintain. Some are supported through tolls, charitable gifts, religious foundations, or local obligations. Where bridges exist, they can become important commercial bottlenecks. Where they do not, ferries do the work. You pay or negotiate passage and step aboard. The boat shifts. Suddenly you remember that nobody here owns a life jacket. The crossing is short. Still, water deserves respect. Flooding can destroy bridges, change fords, and make familiar routes temporarily dangerous. Medieval travellers cannot assume that yesterday's safe crossing remains safe after heavy rain. On the far bank, the road climbs. You continue. A group ahead carries staffs and small bags. Pilgrims, perhaps. Pilgrimage is one of the great reasons for medieval travel. Some journeys are local, perhaps to a nearby shrine. Others cross England. Canterbury draws people to the shrine of Thomas Becket. Walsingham becomes associated with devotion to the Virgin Mary. Other saints attract visitors to monasteries and churches throughout the kingdom. Beyond England lie destinations such as Rome, Santiago de Compostela, and Jerusalem. A journey to Jerusalem is extraordinary. Dangerous, expensive, spiritually powerful. Crusading has also made the Eastern Mediterranean intensely present in the imagination of Western Christians around your period. Richard I, remembered later as Richard the Lionheart, spent much of his reign away from England and participated in the Third Crusade before dying in the year 1199. News of distant warfare travels home through returning soldiers, clergy, merchants, and official networks. Your small road is connected to very large events. As evening approaches, shelter becomes your concern. If you're near a town, an inn may provide food and lodging. In smaller settlements, hospitality can come through private households or religious institutions. Monasteries have traditions of receiving travellers, though accommodation depends upon status, resources, and circumstance. Hospitals can also serve travellers and the poor. The medieval hospital is not necessarily a medical institution in the modern sense. Many provide hospitality, care, food, or shelter for particular groups. You might share sleeping space with strangers. Your earlier village bed suddenly seems luxurious. Travellers tell stories. Someone has heard news from London. Someone knows a merchant from York. Someone insists a nearby road is haunted. Someone else insists the first man owes him money and should therefore not be trusted about ghosts. You eat what is available. Ale, bread, perhaps cheese or pottage. Then you check your belongings carefully. Travel encourages caution. Your pouch remains attached. Your knife remains close. Outside, darkness settles across the road. Without artificial illumination, continuing becomes increasingly foolish unless necessity demands it. The medieval night belongs to uncertainty. Tomorrow the track may carry you onward. Tonight you stay among strangers, and when morning comes, you will discover that roads are not the only places where medieval society worries about danger. Every village and town has thieves, arguments, assaults, debts, accusations, and people who refuse to follow rules. England has no modern police force waiting to solve these problems. Instead, justice depends upon neighbours, courts, officials, oaths, fines, and procedures that may feel both surprisingly organised and deeply unfamiliar. Morning finds you checking your pouch before anything else. Still there. Excellent. The strangers around you begin gathering their belongings. and for a moment the ordinary caution of travel brings you directly into one of medieval society's largest problems. What happens when somebody actually steals something? There is no professional police force waiting in a station nearby, no emergency number, no detective arrives to examine fingerprints while looking thoughtfully at the muddy road. Yet England around the year 1200 is far from lawless. In fact, royal government has spent decades developing increasingly sophisticated systems of justice. Responsibility begins surprisingly close to home. Communities are expected to participate in maintaining order if a serious crime occurs and an alarm is raised. Local people may be required to join pursuit through what becomes known as the hue and cry. You hear shouting, you respond. At least, you are supposed to. Older systems of collective responsibility also remain influential. Groups of households can be expected to answer for members or help ensure that accused people appear before authorities. The basic logic is practical. The Crown does not have thousands of professional officers stationed across England, so the population itself becomes part of enforcement. Local officials matter too. The sheriff is one of the king's most important representatives within a county. His responsibilities include royal administration, financial duties, summoning juries, executing court orders, and helping enforce justice. Below this level, local officers and community structures perform everyday tasks. The system is layered, and like almost every medieval institution you have encountered, it works better in some places than others. Suppose your neighbour accuses someone of theft. The case may enter a local court. Minor disputes can be handled within manorial or other local jurisdictions. More serious offences increasingly fall under royal justice. This expansion of royal law is one of the major developments of the generations before your visit. Henry II, who ruled during the 12th century, introduced reforms that strengthened royal courts and procedures. Travelling royal justices carried the king's authority through the country. Juries also became increasingly important, but do not picture a modern courtroom jury sitting silently while lawyers present evidence. Medieval jurors can be local men selected partly because they know the community and may already know something about the dispute. Your modern instinct says this sounds suspiciously biased. Medieval administration says this sounds wonderfully efficient. Who better to tell the court what happened than people who know everyone involved? Oaths carry enormous importance. A person's reputation affects whether statements are trusted. In some procedures, supporters may swear concerning a person's credibility or claims. Truth is not investigated through forensic science. It is reconstructed through testimony, reputation, local knowledge, written records where available, and accepted legal procedure. Older methods of judgment still survive around your period. One of the strangest to modernize is trial by ordeal. The theory rests upon divine judgment. If human beings cannot determine guilt, God can reveal the truth. An accused person might undergo an ordeal involving hot iron or water, with the result interpreted according to prescribed procedures. The popular image makes ordeals seem like random torture followed by someone shouting guilty. The reality is more ritualized. Clergy can supervise, prayers are said. Rules govern what happens. In the ordeal of hot iron, for example, the condition of a wound after a period of healing can determine judgment. This does not make the process scientifically reliable. But within a society that accepts divine intervention, its logic feels different, and its days are numbered. In the year 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council will prohibit clerical participation in ordeals without clergy. The system loses much of its religious legitimacy in England, encouraging greater reliance on jury procedures. You standing here before that change do not know any of this yet. To you, ordeal remains part of the legal landscape. Punishment varies greatly according to offence, court, status, and circumstances. Fines are extremely common. This matters because popular images of medieval justice focus almost entirely on execution devices. The surviving records are much more interested in money. Someone breaks a rule. Someone pays. Someone violates an obligation. Someone pays. Someone sells ale incorrectly. Someone pays. The medieval legal system has discovered a remarkably durable administrative principle. Serious crimes can bring severe consequences. Hanging is used for certain felonies. Mutilation appears in some contexts. Property can be forfeited. Outlawry can expose a person to enormous danger. But punishment is not automatically spectacular. Prisons exist. Though imprisonment is often used for detention rather than as the standard long-term punishment familiar in modern criminal systems. A jail can hold you while you await proceedings. This is not good news. Conditions can be miserable, and prisoners may depend upon outside support for food or necessities. Your wealth and connections matter enormously. As they usually do, there is another refuge available in certain circumstances: sanctuary. A person accused of crime may seek protection within a church or other recognized sacred space. Sanctuary develops through a mixture of religious tradition and legal practice. It does not simply erase the accusation, but it can temporarily protect the fugitive and force the legal process into particular channels. In later medieval practice, an accused person might confess and abjure the realm, agreeing to leave England under prescribed conditions. The exact rules evolve over time. Still, the underlying idea is powerful. Sacred space limits secular violence. You imagine someone desperately reaching a church doorway while pursuers approach behind. For that person, theology suddenly feels very practical. Church courts possess their own jurisdiction too. Clergy can be subject to ecclesiastical procedures, and church courts handle matters involving marriage, morality, wills, and spiritual discipline. This creates overlapping legal worlds. A dispute may belong to the manor, another to the king, another to the church. Medieval England does not have one neat legal door marked justice. It has several doors, and choosing the correct one can matter greatly. Social status matters too. The wealthy possess resources for legal disputes that poorer people lack. A noble has connections. A monastery has documents and administrators. A poor labourer may depend heavily upon reputation and community support. Women can bring cases and appear in legal records, though their legal position is shaped by marriage, property rules, and social restrictions. Widows often possess greater independent legal capacity than married women. Again, simple categories fail. The records reveal women suing, inheriting, borrowing, selling, accusing, defending, and arguing. Quite a lot of arguing. You begin walking again, and before long you pass a small gathering near a village. Two men are disputing something, perhaps land, perhaps money, perhaps an insult. The exact cause hardly matters. Neighbours watch. Someone will remember what was said. If the disagreement reaches court, those memories may become evidence. This is why reputation matters so deeply. You cannot easily disappear into anonymity. A person known as reliable has an advantage. A person known as troublesome carries that reputation everywhere locally. Community judgment begins long before formal judgment, yet there is something reassuring beneath the unfamiliar procedures. People in 1200 care about fairness. They complain about corrupt officials. They resist unlawful demands. They appeal decisions. They invoke custom. They seek royal intervention. They negotiate settlements. The famous constitutional struggles of the coming years do not appear from nowhere. They grow from a society already deeply concerned with rights, obligations, jurisdiction, and the limits of authority. Of course, ideas of fairness are not equal to yours. Punishments can be harsh. Status creates inequality. Evidence standards are different. The poor remain vulnerable. But this is not chaos. It is a legal culture in transition. Old customary practices exist beside expanding royal administration. Ordeals stand beside juries. Oral testimony stands beside an increasing flood of written records. Local memory stands beside centralized government. And somewhere inside that transition, ordinary people keep doing what ordinary people always do. They borrow. They quarrel. They make agreements. They break agreements. They accuse the wrong person. They occasionally accuse exactly the right person. Then they stand before someone with authority and explain why they are obviously innocent. You continue down the road. A small ache has begun in one of your teeth. At first you ignore it. Then it pulses again. Suddenly medieval justice seems much less frightening than medieval dentistry. Because when sickness or pain enters your body, there is no hospital filled with antibiotics waiting beyond the next hill. There are physicians, surgeons, herbal remedies, prayers, practical experience, and theories about the human body inherited from ancient authorities. Some will help, some will do absolutely nothing, and you may have no reliable way of knowing which is which. The ache in your tooth follows you along the road. At first it's only a dull pulse. Then you bite down incorrectly, and a sharp little warning shoots through your jaw. Wonderful! You have survived medieval roads, suspicious ale, royal forests, and the possibility of trial by ordeal, only to be defeated by one unhappy tooth. Pain is deeply familiar in England around the year 1200. People cut themselves while working. They fall from horses, tools slip, bones break. Burns happen around fires. Animals kick. Teeth decay. Women face the dangers of pregnancy and childbirth. Children encounter infections that your modern world prevents or treats almost casually. An illness can arrive without explanation. Your medieval neighbours are not ignorant of the body. They observe symptoms carefully and possess generations of practical knowledge. What they lack is the scientific framework you take for granted. There is no germ theory. Nobody understands bacteria or viruses as you do. There are no antibiotics. There is no laboratory identifying the organism responsible for your fever. Instead, learned medicine draws heavily upon ancient Greek and Roman traditions transmitted and developed through centuries of scholarship. The names of authorities such as Hippocrates and Galen carry enormous prestige. One particularly influential framework concerns the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile. Health is understood partly as a matter of balance among these substances and the qualities associated with them. Hot, cold, wet, dry. Your body, food, seasons, age, environment, and temperament can all be interpreted through this system. If you become ill, a learned practitioner may try to restore balance. To your modern ears, this sounds hopelessly misguided, and much of it is. But be careful not to imagine that every medieval treatment follows blindly from theory. Practical observation matters too. People know that wounds should be cleaned. They recognize that certain herbs soothe particular symptoms. They learn how to set some fractures. They know that rest can help. They recognize when an illness seems contagious even if they cannot explain why. Medical knowledge is a mixture. Ancient theory, experience, religion, folklore, local tradition, and sometimes surprisingly effective treatment. Your first problem is finding the right healer. A university-trained physician is far beyond the ordinary experience of many villagers. Learned physicians are associated especially with wealthy households, royal courts, major towns, and developing centres of education. Their work emphasizes diagnosis and medical theory. They may examine urine very carefully. Urine inspection becomes an important diagnostic practice. Colour, clarity, sediment, and other characteristics are interpreted as clues about the body's internal condition. A physician might even consult astrological information because celestial influences are widely believed to affect health. You begin appreciating your modern thermometer. Then there are surgeons. The boundary between physician and surgeon is important. Surgery involves practical interventions such as treating wounds, setting bones, draining abscesses, or performing other procedures. Barbers also become associated with certain forms of minor surgery in medieval Europe. Although the familiar barber-surgeon institution develops more strongly over time, for your tooth, someone with practical experience may be able to extract it. That sentence does not improve your mood. Dental treatment is limited. People clean teeth in various ways, including rubbing them with cloths or using powders and preparations. Medieval medical texts contain recipes intended to treat toothache. Some recommend herbs, some recommend rinses, some are based on theories you would prefer not to test. Tooth extraction remains the final solution when decay becomes unbearable. There is no modern local anesthetic. Alcohol may dull fear more effectively than pain. You decide your tooth suddenly feels much better. Perhaps you will wait. For many ordinary illnesses, household medicine comes first. Someone in your family knows remedies. Perhaps an older woman understands which plants are useful. Herbal knowledge is widespread and can be sophisticated. Sage, mint, fennel, plantain, garlic, and numerous other plants appear in medieval remedies. Honey is particularly interesting. People use it in food and medicine, including wound treatments. Modern research has shown that certain honey preparations can inhibit bacterial growth, though medieval users understand the effect through observation rather than microbiology. Some herbal treatments genuinely contain pharmacologically active compounds, others do little, and some can be dangerous. The problem is that you cannot run a controlled clinical trial before drinking grandmother's mysterious green mixture. You trust experience. Reputation matters here too. If someone has successfully helped deliver babies, treat wounds, or reduce fevers for decades, the community remembers. Monasteries can become centers of medical care and herbal knowledge as well. Religious houses cultivate gardens containing medicinal plants. Monastic infirmaries care for sick members, and some institutions provide forms of charity or hospitality to outsiders. But the medieval hospital you encounter is not a modern hospital. Some hospitals care for the poor, others serve travellers. Some specialize in people with particular diseases. Religious devotion and physical care are closely connected. Prayer is not an optional emotional supplement to medicine, it is part of healing. If you become seriously ill, you may ask a priest for spiritual support. You might pray to a saint associated with your condition. You might visit a shrine. You may use a blessed object alongside an herbal remedy. Again, these actions do not seem contradictory. A plant can possess healing properties because God created it. A saint can help because divine power works through holy intercession. A healer can set your broken bone while someone prays for you. Several explanations coexist. Then there are diseases that inspire particular fear. Leprosy is among the most culturally powerful, though the medieval term can encompass conditions that modern medicine would classify differently. Specialized religious houses and hospitals care for people identified as lepers. The common image of every affected person being instantly expelled from society is too simple. Responses vary. Some communities isolate sufferers, but people with leprosy can remain connected to families, receive charity, own property, and participate in structured communities. Disease creates exclusion. It can also create religious obligation toward the sick. Other infections are much more common: respiratory illnesses, fevers, digestive diseases, skin conditions, parasites. Contaminated food or water can cause serious problems. In towns, dense populations increase opportunities for disease transmission. But one catastrophe you associate strongly with the Middle Ages has not yet arrived. The Black Death will not strike England until the middle of the 14th century. For you, it lies more than a century in the future. People in 1200 experience epidemics and mortality, but they do not live beneath the memory of that particular disaster. Life expectancy is another subject that easily misleads modern audiences. You may hear that medieval people live only into their 30s and imagine everyone dropping dead shortly after developing a respectable beard. That is not what averages mean. High infant and childhood mortality pulls average life expectancy dramatically downward. If you survive childhood, reaching your 50s or 60s is entirely possible. Some people live longer, but risk remains high at every age compared with your world. Women face particular danger during childbirth. Midwives possess practical knowledge gained through experience. Female relatives and neighbors often surround the laboring woman. Medical texts discuss childbirth, but ordinary practice belongs heavily to women's domestic knowledge. Most births succeed. Human society would have a serious continuity problem otherwise. Yet complications that modern obstetrics can manage may become fatal. Hemorrhage, obstructed labor, infection. There is no emergency surgical team waiting nearby. Pregnancy therefore carries a quiet uncertainty familiar to every household. Children face their own dangers. Infant mortality is high. Malnutrition can weaken resistance. Infections spread. Accidents happen around fires, water, animals, and agricultural work. Parents use remedies, prayers, charms, and whatever assistance is available. And when a child recovers, relief is enormous. Medieval medicine is easiest to mock when you collect its strangest recipes. There are certainly remedies involving bizarre ingredients, astrological timing, or assumptions about the body that are completely wrong. But that is only part of the picture. A competent healer can clean and dress wounds. A skilled person can set certain fractures. Herbs can relieve symptoms. Diet can support recovery. Rest helps. Experience teaches useful patterns even without understanding the biological mechanism beneath them. The great limitation is not that everyone is foolish. It is that they cannot see the invisible world of infection. A small wound can become dangerous. A tooth can become an abscess. A fever can turn suddenly. You feel your jaw again. The ache has faded. For now. Ahead, the road rises toward higher ground. Beyond the trees, stone walls appear against the sky. A castle. Its towers dominate the surrounding landscape with exactly the confidence you would expect from something built by people who possess considerably more land than you do. Inside live another layer of medieval society. Lords, servants, soldiers, perhaps knights. Their world seems glamorous from a distance, but as you approach the cold stone walls, you begin to suspect that castles, armor, tournaments, and warfare may be much less comfortable than the stories make them sound. The castle grows larger as you approach, until the walls seem to occupy half the sky. From the village, it looked almost elegant. Up close, elegance is clearly not the main idea. The walls are thick, the entrance is controlled, ditches, banks, towers, gates, and defensive positions turn architecture into a statement that everyone in the surrounding countryside understands immediately. Someone here has power. By the year 1200, castles have been part of the English landscape for generations. The Norman conquest in the year 1066 accelerated castle building dramatically. Early fortifications were often constructed from earth and timber, including the familiar motte and bailey form. Over time, many important sites acquire increasingly substantial stone defences, but castles are never one single design. Some are enormous royal fortresses, others are smaller residences of local lords. Some retain timber structures, some occupy earlier defensive sites, and many are altered repeatedly as military technology, wealth, fashion, and political circumstances change. You cross toward the entrance. The gate is one of the weakest points in any defensive wall, so considerable attention is devoted to protecting it. Depending upon the castle, you may encounter a bridge, ditch, heavy doors, gatehouse, or other obstacles. Later medieval castles develop increasingly elaborate systems of portcullises, murder holes, concentric walls, and sophisticated gate defences. You should not casually place every feature into every castle of 1200. History dislikes convenient packages. Still, the principle is clear. Entering is supposed to be easy only when the people inside want you there. Once through, you discover something that dramatic paintings often forget. A castle is busy. Servants carry food. Animals occupy working areas. Craftspeople repair equipment. Guards move through their routines. Cooks prepare meals. Messengers arrive. Clerks handle documents. Children appear. Someone is probably complaining about supplies. A castle is residence, administrative centre, warehouse, workplace, military position, and symbol of lordship all at once. It can also smell remarkably ordinary. Horses, smoke, cooking. Leather, waste, wet wool. Stone walls do not magically remove medieval noses from medieval life. The Great Hall forms the social heart of many castles. Here, the lord can dine, receive visitors, conduct business, hear petitions, entertain guests, and display status. The room may be impressive. Timber roof beams stretch above. Wall hangings or painted decoration can soften surfaces in wealthy residences. Tables and benches are arranged as needed. A raised position can distinguish the lord and important guests. At meals, rank becomes visible through seating, service, food quality, and proximity to the household's most powerful person. You're learning that medieval society can turn almost anything into hierarchy, even dinner. The castle's domestic rooms provide greater comfort than your cottage. But do not imagine modern luxury. Stone can be cold, very cold. Fireplaces exist in important rooms, and architectural heating arrangements become increasingly sophisticated. But maintaining warmth throughout a large stone complex is difficult. Wall hangings help reduce drafts and make rooms feel warmer. Wooden shutters control window openings. Better rooms may contain glazed windows, though glass remains expensive. Beds can be elaborate and valuable. Privies can be built into walls, allowing waste to drop into pits, shafts, or outside areas depending upon design. This is technologically impressive until the wind is blowing in the wrong direction. Then there is the kitchen. A wealthy household consumes extraordinary quantities of food, particularly when guests arrive. Large hearths handle roasting. Pots simmer. Bread is prepared or acquired in quantity. Meat, fish, grain, dairy products, vegetables, spices, and wine flow through storerooms. A lord's table advertises wealth. Serving expensive food is not merely generosity. It demonstrates that the household possesses resources beyond basic survival. Spices are especially useful for this purpose. The familiar claim that medieval cooks use spices to disguise rotten meat is largely misleading. Imported spices are expensive. If you can afford pepper, ginger, cinnamon, or cloves in generous quantities, you can probably afford fresh meat too. Spices display wealth and create flavors medieval diners enjoy. Rich people, it turns out, also prefer their food not to be rotten. Somewhere within this household you may encounter a knight, and he looks considerably less like a fantasy hero than expected. A knight around 1200 is a mounted warrior belonging to a military and social elite. Knighthood is increasingly associated with ideals of noble behavior, Christian duty, loyalty, courage, and what later generations describe through the broad concept of chivalry. Reality is less polished. Knights are trained to fight. That is their central function. Training begins young for many elite boys. Riding, weapon handling, hunting, physical conditioning, and service within aristocratic households prepare them for warfare. Armor around your period is dominated by mail. Thousands of interlinked iron rings form flexible protection. A mail hauberk can cover much of the body. A helmet protects the head. Shields remain important. Plate armor does not yet enclose knights in the complete metal suits familiar from later medieval centuries. Those belong to a different technological stage. Your knight is therefore not walking around like a polished metal statue. Mail is heavy, but its weight is distributed across the body more effectively than popular imagination suggests. A trained fighter can move in it. He can mount a horse. He can run. He can also become exhausted because physics remains stubbornly medieval. Weapons include swords, lances, axes, maces, bows, and crossbows depending upon role and circumstances. The sword carries enormous symbolic importance, but it is only one tool in warfare. A mounted knight's lance can deliver devastating force. Infantry matters too. Most medieval armies are not composed entirely of knights charging heroically toward each other. Foot soldiers form essential parts of military forces. Archers and crossbowmen provide missile power. Specialists operate siege equipment. Laborers dig, carry, build, and move supplies. And supply may be the least glamorous but most important part of warfare. An army eats constantly. Horses eat even more. Moving hundreds or thousands of people through the countryside requires food, fodder, carts, animals, equipment, and organization. When supply fails, soldiers become hungry. Hungry soldiers become extremely interested in whatever nearby civilians own. This is where warfare becomes personal for someone like you. A battle might occur far away. Its consequences can arrive directly at your field. Armies requisition food. Troops damage crops. Animals are taken. Buildings can be burned during campaigns. Roads fill with armed men. Taxes rise to fund operations. A peasant does not need to stand on a battlefield to suffer from war. England around 1200 has experienced plenty of political conflict. The civil war between King Stephen and Empress Matilda during the previous century, remembered as the Anarchy, left later chroniclers with powerful images of disorder. Henry II restored strong royal government but fought conflicts within his own family. Richard I spent years campaigning abroad. Now King John struggles to defend the continental possessions inherited by the Angevin dynasty. Across the Channel, warfare threatens lands, fortunes, and loyalties. For nobles, politics can become military very quickly. Castles therefore matter not only as defensive structures but as strategic points. Control the castle and you can dominate roads, river crossings, towns, estates, and surrounding territory. This is why siege warfare is so important. Most commanders would prefer to capture a fortress without destroying themselves against its walls. Sieges involve blockade, negotiation, mining, bombardment, assault, starvation, treachery, and patience. Siege engines can throw stones against defences. Miners can attempt to undermine walls. Defenders fire arrows or crossbow bolts, throw objects, repair damage, and wait. The famous image of defenders constantly pouring boiling oil from battlements is exaggerated. Oil is expensive. Stones are cheaper. So is hot water. So is anything unpleasant that happens to be available. Medieval practicality wins again. You watch men practicing in the yard. Weapons strike shields. Orders are shouted. There is nothing sleepy about the sound. War is noisy before it is even real. And despite romantic literature celebrating knights, actual combat is terrifying. Bones break. Horses fall. People panic. Armor reduces injury but does not create invulnerability. A knight can be captured rather than killed because a wealthy prisoner may be worth a ransom. Your economic value during battle, unfortunately, is less impressive. Tournaments provide another outlet for knightly aggression. Around this period, they can resemble dangerous mock battles more than the carefully controlled jousting spectacles of later centuries. Groups of mounted warriors clash across broad areas. Horses and equipment can be captured. Ransoms may be demanded. Serious injuries occur. Church authorities repeatedly criticize tournaments. Knights repeatedly participate anyway. Apparently being told not to do something becomes less persuasive when the forbidden activity involves horses, armor, crowds, and prestige. You leave the practice yard behind. From the castle wall, the countryside stretches outward. Fields, villages, roads, woodland. Everything you have crossed seems small from here. That is partly the point. The castle makes power visible, yet it also depends completely upon the landscape below. Without farmers, there is no grain. Without shepherds, no wool. Without craftspeople, no equipment. Without taxes and rents, no household of servants and soldiers. The stone fortress towering above medieval society rests economically upon thousands of ordinary lives. As you descend toward the village again, the air has changed. A colder wind moves through the trees. People glance toward the sky. Summer labour, autumn harvests, lordly obligations, and castle walls all answer eventually to the same force, season. And when winter settles over England, stone castles and humble cottages alike must confront cold nights, limited daylight, stored food, hungry animals, and the long wait for spring. The colder wind follows you downhill. By the time you reach the lower fields, clouds have covered much of the sky, and the landscape seems to have lost some of its colour. Imagine now that the weeks continue turning. Harvest disappears into memory. Leaves fall. Paths become wet. Daylight shrinks. Winter settles over England. This is when all those months of agricultural labour reveal whether they were enough. Your first defence against winter is not the hearth. It is preparation. Grain has been harvested, dried, threshed, winnowed, and stored. Peas and beans wait in containers. Cheese preserves the usefulness of summer milk. Meat from autumn slaughter may have been salted, smoked, or otherwise preserved. Apples and other suitable produce can be stored where conditions allow. Hay has been gathered. Fuel has been collected. Roof repairs should already be finished. If you begin thinking seriously about winter after the snow arrives, medieval life has some unfortunate news for you. Inside your house, the fire becomes increasingly important. You feed it carefully. Wood is labour. Every branch burned tonight represents time spent collecting, cutting, transporting, and drying fuel. Access can also be restricted by local rights. You cannot necessarily enter any woodland and remove whatever you please, so you manage heat rather than attempting to make the entire building feel like a modern heated apartment. You stay near the hearth. You wear layers. You use wool. At night, people sleep close together. Drafts are reduced with shutters, coverings, and whatever practical materials are available. Animals may be kept in adjoining or sheltered areas depending upon the design of the household. Their warmth can contribute slightly to the building environment, though the popular claim that medieval families routinely brought every cow into the living room as a biological radiator is far too simple. The cow has accommodation. You have accommodation. Sometimes these spaces are connected. Nobody has invited the cow beneath the blanket. Your house still feels cold. A hearth warms the immediate area effectively, but heat escapes through openings in the roof. Smoke remains another problem, particularly in buildings without developed chimneys. You face an unpleasant balance. More fire means more warmth. More fire means more smoke and more fuel consumed. You shift closer anyway. Outside, rain may be a more persistent problem than dramatic snow. Medieval English winters vary considerably. Some are relatively mild, others bring severe frost and snow. Long-term climatic patterns are complicated, and historians use written accounts, environmental evidence, tree rings, ice records, and other sources to reconstruct them. Around your period, Europe is often associated broadly with the later part of what scholars have called the medieval warm period, although the term can oversimplify enormous regional and yearly variation. There is no permanently warm medieval England. A wet, windy winter night remains perfectly capable of making you miserable. Mud dominates roads. Fields become difficult to work. Water freezes during colder spells. Livestock require attention regardless of weather. That last part is especially unfair. Your cow does not understand that it is raining sideways. Animals need fodder. They need water. They become sick. Winter feeding places pressure on stored hay and grain. This is one reason households cannot simply keep unlimited livestock through the cold months. Autumn slaughter reduces the number of mouths consuming winter fodder and produces preserved meat. The animals that remain represent future value. You protect them carefully. A dead ox in January can become an agricultural disaster in spring. The shorter days reshape human work too. Outdoor labour does not disappear, but there are fewer useful daylight hours. More work moves indoors. Tools are repaired. Wooden objects are maintained. Textiles demand endless attention. Spinning continues. Clothing is patched. Food is processed. People talk. Stories fill darkness more cheaply than candles. The hearth becomes social space again. Perhaps someone tells a saint's story. Someone remembers a traveller who once passed through the village. Someone repeats a tale that everyone has heard 15 times. Everyone listens anyway because the alternative is staring at the wall. Children play nearby. A person works with a spindle. Another repairs a strap. The fire cracks. For a few moments, winter can almost feel cozy. Almost. Then the wind finds a gap in the wall. The romantic atmosphere leaves immediately. Lighting is another limitation. Tallow candles cost resources. Rushlights are modest. Firelight helps, but detailed work becomes difficult after dark. Your body therefore follows the season more closely than it does in the modern world. Winter evenings can mean longer periods of rest simply because there is less practical illumination. This does not necessarily mean you sleep continuously from sunset until sunrise. Historical patterns of segmented sleep have generated considerable scholarly discussion, especially for later periods. Evidence suggests that some pre-industrial people may wake during the night before returning to sleep, but historians debate how universal such patterns were and how confidently they can be projected into every medieval household. Your own night is simpler. You sleep when tired. You wake when cold. You adjust the blanket. Someone beside you has stolen most of it. Some historical experiences require no documentary evidence. Food becomes the greater concern as winter advances. At first, stores may feel secure, but every meal makes them smaller. The household knows roughly what remains. Grain must last. Salted meat must last. Cheese must last. Legumes must last. Seed grain for planting must not casually become dinner. That distinction can become painful. A sack of grain might technically be edible. But if you consume the seed needed for spring sowing, you solve today's hunger by creating tomorrow's. Good household management means thinking months ahead. Then comes the difficult period approaching spring. Stored foods diminish. Fresh plants are limited. Animals may produce less. The previous harvest feels increasingly distant. A wealthy household can purchase additional supplies. A poor household has fewer choices. If the previous harvest was weak, prices may already be high. Hunger does not always arrive as dramatic famine. More often it creeps. Portions become smaller. Meals become thinner. Better foods disappear. People rely increasingly on what remains. The vulnerable suffer first. Children. The elderly. The sick. Yet communities can provide support. Neighbors lend grain. Relatives share resources. Landlords or religious institutions may provide charity. Monasteries distribute alms. Parish relationships matter. Markets bring supplies from elsewhere when transport and purchasing power allow. Medieval survival is rarely purely individual. Remember those neighbors who know everything about you. In January, that can become useful. You know who has lost an animal. You know whose roof failed. You know whose child is sick. And they know when your food stores are becoming uncomfortable. Mutual assistance does not eliminate hardship. Neither is it guaranteed. Communities contain conflict and inequality, but cooperation remains one of the most important technologies in your world. Weather can overwhelm even good preparation. A severe storm damages thatch. Flooding destroys stored food. Prolonged frost disrupts travel. Livestock die. Mills may become difficult to operate under certain conditions. If grain cannot easily reach the mill, bread production becomes complicated. Then there is fire. The thing keeping you alive through winter can destroy the house. Dry thatch and timber burn readily. A spark in the wrong place is dangerous. People treat hearths with practical caution, because everyone has seen what fire can do. You bank embers at night rather than leaving flames uncontrolled. Still, accidents happen. There is no fire brigade arriving with a motorized pump. Neighbors become the response. Buckets. Tools. Hands. Urgency. Again, survival belongs to the community. On the coldest nights, you retreat beneath wool and straw. The house becomes quiet. Wind presses against the walls. Perhaps snow gathers outside. The fire declines to embers. You can hear another person breathing. An animal shifts somewhere nearby. No electricity hums. No traffic passes. There is only darkness. This is the medieval night stripped of romance. Cold, intimate, smoky, and profoundly quiet. Yet you're not necessarily lying awake in misery. This is normal life. Your body knows wool, straw, fire, shared warmth, and seasonal cold from childhood. You do not compare the room with central heating, because central heating does not exist in your imagination. You think instead about tomorrow. Is there enough fuel? Does the roof need attention? How much grain remains? Will the weather improve? When can work resume properly? And eventually, almost imperceptibly, daylight begins lasting longer. Birdsong changes. Fields soften. The first signs of growth return. Winter has not defeated you. Not this year. The stores lasted. The animals survived. The roof remained above your head. Soon the plough will return to the soil, and that exhausting agricultural cycle you once regarded as hardship will feel almost reassuring. But before another year begins, there is still tonight. You return toward the hearth as evening settles, ready for supper, conversation, prayer, and sleep. After walking through almost every corner of this medieval world, you're about to end exactly where ordinary history so often begins and ends. At home, you settle beside the hearth while the last daylight fades from the doorway. The village outside is becoming quieter. Not silent, never completely silent. A dog barks somewhere beyond the neighbouring houses. A wooden door closes. Someone calls to an animal that apparently has no interest in ending its day according to human plans. From farther away comes the faint sound of a bell. Inside, the fire gives the room its familiar reddish glow. This is where your medieval day returns to its beginning. The same walls surround you. The same smoke darkens the timbers. The same possessions wait in their practical places. But after everything you have seen, the household no longer feels quite as simple as it did when you first opened your eyes. You understand what every object represents. The wool around your shoulders began with sheep and hours of processing. The bread on the table began months ago with soil, seed, rain, ploughing, harvesting, threshing, milling, and baking. The wooden bowl required a craftsperson's hands. The iron knife hanging from your belt passed through a smith's fire. Even the small flame before you depends upon rights to woodland, collected fuel, human labour, and careful management. Nothing here appears effortlessly. That may be the most important difference between your life and the one you usually know. In England, around the year 1200, effort remains visible. Supper is served. Perhaps there is pottage again. There probably is. The medieval household has not suddenly discovered takeaway food because you have reached the final evening. Bread accompanies it. Perhaps cheese, perhaps a little preserved meat. Ale is poured. If the household has been fortunate, the meal is filling. If stores are running low, portions may be modest. You eat slowly. Conversation moves around the fire. Someone mentions work that needs doing tomorrow. A tool requires repair. An animal has been behaving strangely. A neighbour has heard news from the town. Someone repeats a rumour involving the Lord's officials. Nobody knows whether it is true. Everyone discusses it anyway. You have seen this information network before. News arrives through mouths rather than screens. Its speed depends upon movement. A merchant can carry stories from one town to another. A priest may know something from church connections. A traveller brings distant events closer. A royal messenger carries official information with greater urgency. But most evenings are occupied by local concerns. Weather matters more immediately than diplomacy. A sick cow matters more than a distant noble's quarrel. The condition of the grain store may matter more than whatever the king is doing across the channel. This is another correction to the history you may have learned. Kings provide convenient dates. Wars create dramatic narratives. Documents preserve the decisions of powerful men. But most people experience history indirectly. A king goes to war. You experience attacks. A noble changes allegiance. You experience soldiers passing through. A monastery acquires land. You experience a new landlord. A harvest fails. You experience hunger. History reaches your household through consequences, yet your own small decisions also shape the world. You marry. You raise children. You teach them where the good grazing lies. You show them how to recognize approaching rain. You pass along songs, prayers, recipes, warnings, jokes, grudges, and stories. You repair the same house your parents repaired. You cultivate strips that may eventually pass to another generation. Most of these actions will never be written down. That does not make them unimportant. Someone adds fuel to the hearth. The flames rise briefly. Faces become clearer. Perhaps an older member of the household tells a story. It might concern a saint, a local event, a strange traveller, a memory from childhood, or something supernatural enough that everyone becomes slightly more aware of the darkness beyond the doorway. You remember how comfortably Christian faith and older customs share this world. Tomorrow, the same person telling you about a wandering spirit may attend Mass with complete sincerity. There is no contradiction that needs solving. The universe is large enough for both. Before sleep, prayer may become part of the household routine. The words are familiar. You have heard them since childhood. Religion provides explanations for suffering, hope for salvation, structure for time, and reassurance against uncertainty. And uncertainty is everywhere. You cannot know whether next year's harvest will succeed. You cannot know whether illness will enter the house. You cannot know whether political conflict will reach your region. You cannot know whether a child will survive a fever. Faith does not remove these dangers. It gives them meaning. The fire begins settling again. One by one, tasks stop. Tools are put aside. Bowls are cleared. The doorways secured as well as the household can secure it. You check the fire carefully. An uncontrolled flame near dry timber and thatch would turn this peaceful evening into something considerably less relaxing. The embers can be banked beneath ash so that some heat remains and the fire may be revived in the morning. Then you prepare for bed. Your outer clothing is loosened or removed according to circumstance. Valuable garments are placed somewhere reasonably safe. There is no walk upstairs to a private bedroom. Sleeping arrangements return everyone to close proximity. You settle onto straw-filled bedding. It rustles beneath your weight. The woolen covering comes over you. Someone else adjusts beside you. Shared sleeping means shared warmth. It also means shared movement, shared noises, and occasionally a determined struggle for possession of the blanket. The medieval household teaches generosity through extremely direct methods. Outside, darkness has become complete. This is a darkness difficult to recreate in your modern world. No distant headlights. No illuminated windows stretching toward the horizon. No aircraft blinking overhead. No glowing phone beside the bed. If clouds cover the moon and stars, the countryside can become almost invisible. Sound therefore becomes stronger. Wind in thatch, rain against the roof, an owl, a horse shifting, a cough from the bedding, the soft crack of cooling wood. You listen, and perhaps this is the moment when medieval England feels least foreign, because beneath all the differences in law, medicine, religion, clothing, housing, and technology, the people around you are doing something deeply ordinary. They are ending a long day. Someone is worried about money. Someone hopes tomorrow will be warmer. Someone is thinking about a person they love. Someone regrets an argument. Someone is already asleep. A child asks one final question when every adult clearly hoped the questions were finished. 8 centuries disappear surprisingly quickly. You think back over the day. You woke inside a smoky household and stepped into fields divided by obligations you barely understood. You learned that clothing represents labor rather than disposable fashion. Food follows seasons. Work follows daylight. The village watches everyone. The Lord claims rents and services. The church claims spiritual authority. Towns offer trade and opportunity. Roads connect surprisingly mobile communities. Courts attempt to impose order without modern police. Healers combine observation with theories that sometimes help and sometimes wander impressively far from reality. Castles dominate landscapes but depend upon the labor beneath their walls. Winter tests every decision made during the warmer months. And ordinary people adapt. That is perhaps the strongest impression left by England in 1200. Not misery, not romance, adaptation. People know how to live within the world available to them. They build houses from local materials. They preserve food without refrigeration. They organize fields without tractors. They communicate without electronic networks. They create legal systems, markets, communities, rituals, entertainment, and families. They complain. They improvise. They laugh. They survive. Of course, survival is unequal. A wealthy noble and a landless labourer do not experience the same Middle Ages. A healthy adult and a sick child do not face the same odds. A free tenant and an unfree villager possess different choices. There is no single medieval life. There are millions of lives overlapping across generations. Most leave almost no direct voice behind. You know them through fragments. A foundation in the soil. A worn shoe preserved in wet ground. Animal bones beside a settlement. A line in a court roll, a payment recorded by a monastery, a skeleton carrying evidence of labour, a manuscript image showing someone cutting grain. Each fragment whispers rather than shouts. Historians disagree about some of what those whispers mean. They debate population, diet, buildings, social categories, agricultural development, sleeping patterns, beliefs, and countless details of ordinary behaviour. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It reminds you that the past was once a living place rather than a finished story, and now the story around you grows quiet. The embers darken. Your eyes close. The room becomes warmer beneath the wool, or perhaps you simply stop noticing the cold. Outside, England rests beneath a deep night sky. Fields disappear into darkness. The road lies empty. The castle on the distant hill becomes only a shape against the clouds. The church is silent. Tomorrow there will be bells again. There will be bread to prepare, animals to tend, water to carry, fields to cross, neighbours to greet, obligations to fulfill, and small problems that feel enormous until evening comes. But none of that belongs to you now. For a little while there is nothing to repair, nothing to harvest, nothing to carry. You can leave the smoky hearth behind and allow the village to fade gently into the distance. The wind moves softly across the sleeping fields. A final ember glows beneath its covering of ash. Somewhere beneath the thatched roofs, families settle closer together as the night deepens, protected by walls built and repaired by generations of familiar hands. The roads are empty now, the market stalls closed, the castle gates quiet. Even the bells have nothing more to say. So you let the year 1200 drift farther away, until the fire is only a warm point in the darkness, and the darkness itself feels soft rather than uncertain. Your work is finished. The field can wait, the morning can wait, and as medieval England sleeps beneath the stars, you may sleep too, slowly and peacefully, while the last sounds of that distant world disappear into the night.